Do you think that you witnessed war crimes taking place?
Probably. The ground assumption is that they are Hamas. And then if you go this way, you're bound to kill people that are not.
Now, in a rare interview, one soldier tells us about the reality he says he witnessed. What kind of stuff would they say?
There are no uninvolved, only unarmed. This is something that I'm going to carry for the rest of my life.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Monday, May 20th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. A lot to cover. Some pretty big events over the last couple of days we're going to discuss and into today regarding the International Criminal Court, an Iranian plane crash with the president, as well as a ongoing, for a long time now, but kind of a resurgence of the U.S. involvement on the ground with the Democratic Republic of Congo in an attempt at another coup. At least that's what the facts seem to present. At the very least, we know that there was Americans on the ground, there were British people on the ground, one person that overlaps as, I believe, an Israeli American. We'll talk about all of this and how important it really is to the larger picture. But I find it most interesting that we're seeing this as somebody looks like everybody, of course, somebody's saying black screen. It looks all good on my end. So let me know in the chat what you guys are seeing. As we're seeing the International Criminal Court bring forward, or at least announce, the charges. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I don't have any, I mean, I can see it clearly on my screen, guys, so I have no idea why you wouldn't be able to see my screen. Are you able to see that? Let me know in the chat. What a wonderful way to start today. So I'm going to keep going. Let me know if you can see. Yeah, looks like pretty much everybody's saying that. I don't even know how that's possible. I'm StreamYard. I'm looking at the screen. Everything's lined up perfectly. So let's see. I don't even know how we would continue if there's no video whatsoever. Is this just another form of censorship? Let's see, guys. I don't know. This always kills me when I got this great thing lined up. Everything's ready to go. I'm ready to jump into it. And right out of the gate, we get these little things like this happen. I guess I can try to. Oh, okay. So now it's okay. Yeah. I mean, okay. So looks like we're okay I'm going to let it go for another second just to make sure I'm not jumping the gun and it's not visible. Not you, but the website is showing up. That's fantastic. Well, just so you guys know, there's no issue on the feed or the connection. I can see the feed on StreamYard from my end, so this must be a StreamYard problem. In any case, you guys don't need to see me, so that's not a problem. Let's continue. So the point, as we get into this to start, is a lot of things happening at once. And I find it very interesting that this is happening while this comes out. Not necessarily to say or even imply that this is why those were happening. I just think it's interesting that we're seeing this kind of breakdown of what used to be the norm. And that's not even just about Israel and the way that the Israeli government, the Zionist faction, has completely influenced and in many ways controlled things that are pervasive. Whether we're talking about the perception of certain conversations, whether we're talking about religion and the way it's perceived, I mean, it's really an alarming, pervasive, surreptitious concept. And this is what many people are beginning to understand about what Zionism truly is and things that they've said themselves, and the way that the Israeli government has practices and legislation in place to make sure that even within their society, it's actually illegal to discuss or announce or highlight the things that we can prove. And I'm talking about the documentation of what happened, let's just say, for example, during the Nakba. And these have been admitted by Haaretz and by other Jewish people, by other Israelis. But yet we still get called racist for highlighting these things, or somehow biased for highlighting things that we can prove, as well as we all continue to highlight the things that we think are important in the conversation. We all have the perceptions that we believe, the way that we view things and the way we think things fit together. But that doesn't mean we're always right. What's important to understand is that the best we can do in any situation is be objective as we can, to try to put forward all sides of a conversation and to provide your source material. Nobody is without bias. And I'm talking about this because of something that I was discussing online earlier today. And I think it's interesting that there's, in this conversation more than ever, it's come out really clearly that there are a few people in this, I guess not people, but more so mindsets in this conversation, where we're talking about people that are unaware that they are completely blind when it comes to anything circling around the Israel conversation. And I only say that because I genuinely believe that there are people that believe that they're being honest. And I think it's a smaller group, but that truly have a complete blind spot when it comes to anything about Israel and are so on guard that they attack people for simply trying to be objective about the conversation. Then there are people that I can clearly see that are willfully deceiving people for the interest of Israel or whatever they believe they're fighting for on that side. And then there's people I believe that are genuinely trying to call it out. Now, of course, there's a multifaceted group within that as well, even to the point that I can prove to you that there are outwardly absolute racists that are using this conversation to push forward their belief that all Jews in the world are bad, which is ridiculous and disgusting. But the frustrating part is that those people will attack those of us like what we're doing here, as if we somehow secretly hate all the Jews, which I just can't even say without laughing about it right now. Not to say that there's not somebody out there that does, that we can point them out in our chat sometimes. The point is that it's incredible that we can try our best to have an objective conversation about things that are swirling around some of the biggest topics in the developing conversations in the world, historical foreign policy dynamics, and just do our best to be objective about it and highlight provable connection to these things. And yet those people will still try to shout you down and still try to act like you're wink, wink, saying what we all know. It's just sort of embarrassing. And I really believe it's a dying thing right now. Not that that's not going to come back in other topics, but I mean, in regard to Israel. Now, I'm saying all of this because what we're talking about today, going back in history, is where it becomes so frustrating for some people, like Congo, for example. And I just highlighted the idea of the diamond trade, the blood diamonds, and the horrific reality that is very easy to see that ties directly to Israel and the diamond industry, of what they do with child labor, and the reality of not just that, but a lot of things that have revolve around the blood diamond market, or conversations like Rwanda or Bosnia or any other previous genocides that we can literally prove that Israel was involved with, as well as the U.S. in many cases. And it's only relevant right now because we're discussing Israel as a central point to a lot of the things we're discussing today. Now, why should we be worried to talk about those things when you can literally point to the leading newspaper, one of them in Israel, Haaretz, who have broken these things down over the years, even highlighted that the reason these are so quiet and so hard to find is because their legislation makes it a law that they're not allowed to even access these documents, not as journalists, not as anybody. So it's incredible that there's so people that don't see that, choose to ignore how controlled and how dishonest all of this is. But at the same time, I'm finding a lot of beacons of light out there that I never expected. People that I think are, and I'm not even talking about the ones you might think are the people that probably most of which a lot of the non-regular viewers might not even know about, but people out there that are, in my opinion, taking the same kind of stance, being objective, trying to be as honest and as factual as we can with, of course, our own opinions. Nobody is without bias. Anybody out there pretending that they aren't or are without bias are dishonest people. The best we can do is try to be objective throughout it all. Now that I've waited quite a while, and I did want to mostly say all of that, but really just wanted to make sure we're still good with the picture. Let me know in the chat. Everything's up and running before we jump into this. I don't want to have another breakdown throughout it all because I think a lot of this is very important today. So I'm going to get going, but let me know in the chat. And also let me know if you are able to see me or not. I just brought up my view as well. Not that that matters for the larger show, but just curious ultimately what's going on. So let's get into it. So I wanted to start actually with an interesting point that's sort of completely disconnected from the larger points we're going to make today. And it's actually pretty incredible that it's so prominent, which has been up on the screen the whole time I've been talking now. Picture good. It feels just my camera. That's very interesting to me. I'm just, not that I need to say this, but I'm thinking if I were just to jump out of StreamYard and come back in, it would probably be okay. But I don't want to have to reset everything. So I'm just going to leave it that way for today. But interesting indeed. But so, oh, now you can see me. Interesting. Anyway, let's get past from all of that. For those in the podcast who are listening to this the day after I started, you're all like, get to it, Ryan. So this is an important conversation about the Red Cross, about blood contamination that I think is actually pretty incredible. This is from the UK. So, so you know, the headline is sort of a running. I absolutely hate these live update feed channel. Like I wish they would just post articles about what's happening. But this is about, at least as the title says now, Sunak offers wholehearted apology to victims of infected blood scandal. Isn't that interesting? Especially for those of us that have been following the Red Cross contamination with the idea of the spike protein conversation. Now, we could talk about mRNA as well, but I think the real point is about what we can very clearly prove, which is that the spike protein is, in fact, in the blood well past well, first of all, they lied about it ever being that case. One spike protein and it stays in your shoulder muscle and all these lies they split out. No, we know that it continues to go, that it goes into your bloodstream, that it then circulates in some cases for months. And this has been scientifically proven, peer-reviewed science. And I'll show you them in a second. And then we know that people have given blood within a time frame, even as the Red Cross says you have to have this much time after you've got the shot. There's a whole window there where we can prove that they do and can have spike proteins in their blood. Then we can prove the spike protein has been proven by the Salk Institute, Circular Research, I believe is the name of the medical journal. Even the Dr. Luigi Warren himself argued that it is there and that it can even shed. The point is that these things can be caught, it can cause symptoms, and it can spread again, which that's like interesting conversation that I get into every time. We're not going to talk about now. You know, what is that? It's not COVID or whatever we want to call it. If it's just a protein of it, and that can then make symptoms and so on, it sounds like a weapon to me. But either way, the point is we know for a fact, based on the same science they're telling us to trust, that this is a problem. But yet it has gotten zero attention. It's gotten zero follow-up, zero coverage by any of the so-called journalists out there in the corporate media. So what's interesting now is this is about something that connects to the U.S., the same general problem, but from a different angle. Now I'm just going to go to these clips because it's updated a bunch since we've been getting ready. It was just, and here, just so to look at the headline, the most recent one. This is from one of the victim's sons. It was just blatant cover-ups. Yeah, we know that, right? It says, we've been bringing you reaction to today's report from some of the affected families. Now, this is an overlap with HIV, in fact, and it says that he was infected early 1980s when he contracted HIV during a blood transfusion. Now, think about how crazy it is that we can know that. And let's also, this should be its own show in and of itself, by the way, and we've talked about most of this already, the overlap of HIV and AIDS. Even Dr. Fauci, Dr. Mikovits made this real clear in the beginning, but most people weren't ready to hear all this, and that this was already a problem. It's the same damn conversation, even the conversation of whether AIDS and HIV are even, one causing the other kind of conversation, or whether really it's the side effects of things being called something else, and we're really talking about VAIDS, or your body having a reaction, not so much as catching something and getting sick. In any case, this was a problem that got covered up until now, essentially. So how are we going to pretend that the idea of spike protein, the blood, and Red Cross is not a huge issue that they're also covering up? We should at least ask the question, which none of the so-called journalists in the corporate media will do. This is just one of the points in there. Read it all. It's really interesting. It's ongoing. How could the scale of bloods of suffering been avoided? It simply says a common practice used by the government, certainly during the 1980s and 90s, was that patients had received, quote, the best treatment available, which they say this is just politics at this point, but it says, but that was not true. Shocking. As the public inquiry has clearly laid out. In fact, the scale of suffering could and should be largely avoided, it said, but how? Firstly, the blood products imported from the United States to treat people with bleeding disorders should simply never have been licensed for use. So you can easily at least connect the reality of the United States and their incompetence or their willful disregard or their criminal activity in regard to the blood conversation. But I don't think this is just the United States. Quite frankly, I think it's always bigger than that. But either way, we have to realize that this could be simple as that. And they've just been hiding it this entire time. Drug companies were allowed to pay people for their blood and did so by offering drug addicts and prisoners money. Gee, I wonder why. I mean, we don't even need to say how ridiculous that is, and the concept of drug addicts and asking them for their blood, like that's going to be safe somehow. I think this was more of an experiment, if you want my honest opinion. But here's what it says after, which of course I always give my honest opinion. here is another one of these points. This gives you kind of the overall breakdown. And this is from one of the speeches given from Sir Brian Langstaff, speaking about the findings of this 5-year public inquiry, which do we really want to pretend that this took 5 years to figure out, even though we knew this was happening decades ago? You know, this is dragging this out for 5 years kind of a thing. I mean, the evidence is self-evident as far as I'm concerned. Langstaff said the contaminated blood disaster was no accident. That's a big deal. That means that somebody did this or covered it up or allowed it, and then, you know, whatever differing possibilities, it was not by accident. So somebody should be going to prison for this. I'm willing to bet you that that doesn't happen. And people who put their trust in doctors and governments were betrayed over many decades, it says. Most infections contracted via contaminated blood would have been prevented if the patient's safety had been paramount. I mean, my God, we're talking, so the idea that the patient's safety is not paramount in a patient, just please overlap this for those that might be still skeptical of the vaccines, or, you know, the idea that the COVID-19 conversation was all conspiracy theories. The idea that when we can clearly see that they do not put your safety at the top of the list in the context of what things they're doing for you, you just need to recognize that that's pretty much how they think in general. And it says children witnessed the decline of and death of one, sometimes both parents, and their lives were irrevocably altered. I mean, I can go on for a while. You get the clear point here. Now, this is just one of these articles about it. UK inquiry accuses authorities of cover-up in infected blood scandal. Now, what's interesting, of course, is it's an inquiry from the UK, but my opinion, if you want it, is that ultimately I think that the governments are absolutely involved with allowing this, covering it up, turning a blind eye, whatever you want to call it. So this feels a little bit like a cover-up in and of itself. We'll see what happens in regard to accountability, but let's end with this segment to make sure we do not forget. This is the reason I'm even talking about this. We've talked about that story. Again, they're breaking the news about the thing we just investigated that we've all been talking about for 20 years, right? That's how this ridiculous concept goes, is that we pretend it's the illusion of accountability in most cases only when it's at the absolute breaking point, usually a little bit beyond that, right? That they're trying to patch up something that's completely irrevocably broken with a half story to make you think that everything's back. And my point is they've lost control. That's why it's broken. But Red Cross, September 13th, 2022. In response to Longclaw, who actually, I'm really surprised they responded to this as they posted something about blood, giving blood, 2022. And they said, is COVID vaccinated blood labeled as such? It's a very valid question. What if you need blood and you don't want vaccinated blood? I mean, I don't even know why that's considered a conspiracy theory. Whether or not you think the spike protein, whatever else, I mean, we're talking about even historical concepts, not even mRNA. We're talking about things that historically there is something there. It's not just benign. And so the idea that you at the very least, whether it's benign or not, isn't it your choice? Shouldn't I demand, or you demand, that we want to know this information? Clearly most do. They don't care. Here's what they said, a flat out lie. We don't label blood products as containing vaccinated or unvaccinated blood. Why? Because the COVID vaccine does not enter the bloodstream. They are still standing by that. There is literally nobody saying that anymore, as far as I can tell. That has been roundly shown to be false. Whether it was an accident or designed that way, it is not the truth. And they still stand by that. I retweeted this just again today. I keep doing that. They keep seeing it and they keep ignoring it. And the point is, the study is one of many from 2023, peer-reviewed. SARS-CoV-2 spike mRNA vaccine sequences circulate in the blood up to 28 days after. And in this case, it was because that's how long they looked. And other studies we found go even longer. And I posted some of them down below. I believe, I think it's under this. Oh, I should have kept that other one open. Oh, anyway, there was more that I had underneath this. Maybe this one. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. This one, again, another study. This one is from 2023, September. Duration of SARS-CoV-2 vaccine persistence. And this one says the results, they routinely persist up to 30 days and can be detected in the heart. It's all fake news, though, right? I mean, there's more down here. We've covered this many times. So the reality of all of this, especially as we're seeing that they're, 40 years later going, whoopsie, we made a mistake and we're only now talking about it. Too late. Everybody's gotten the problem. That we have to recognize that this is a real problem and the blood supply is contaminated. That's not a question. There's no way around it at this point. And people like Mikovits would tell you that's been going on for 20, 30 years. I just think that's shockingly important. And it's one of the stories, like any number of things that we can prove, like East Palestine and the complete cover up therein, Alan Shaw knowingly hiding the fact that it was treated vinyl chloride and not regular vinyl chloride, which the person told him, their expert, that it wouldn't explode, lied to the volunteer fire chief, and they blame it. I mean, it's all public. It was done in court, but nobody cares because we don't live in an honest system right now. And the people that are supposed to be the journalists turn a blind eye, like just like this. Now, I'll include the ones where we talked about this. This is from 2023, just Red Cross caught. And then there's another one we did a little bit later. I believe this. Oh, no, this was the earlier one from 2022. Vaxxed Red Cross blood donations. And in this one, I have a phone call with them where they admit on the record why they don't let it, why they were differentiating. And I think you remember why. And I might even have that clip still. Yeah, it's right here. This was on corporate media.
On your COVID-19 vaccine, you're going to want to listen to this. The Red Cross says anyone who has received their COVID-19 vaccine cannot donate convalescent plasma to help other COVID-19 patients in hospitals. That plasma is made up of antibodies from people who have recovered from the virus, but the vaccine wipes out those antibodies, making the convalescent plasma ineffective in treating other COVID-19 patients.
Whoopsie. And we also have the guy from Pfizer who's on the record saying that it reduces your antibodies by 2 or 3-fold, I think he said. It's all on the record. It's amazing to me that we pretend like this isn't happening like everything else. So let's talk about another example where I guarantee this will get drifted along. People, because of the two-party illusion screamers, the people on the top of that paradigm that choose to only look at things through a certain partisan lens and keep these stories buried so we don't really ever see any traction. That's the game. That is what the two-party illusion is there for. And most of the people at the top of this don't even really recognize that, I would argue. Nonetheless, they're playing their roles, that these things don't really change. We've already seen these examples. We're talking now for the podcast about the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's important that we recognize that it's the Democratic Republic of Congo. That there is yet another example of a coup. Now, this is coming from people in the government in Congo, as well as common sense here, I think is very clear based on historical. I'll just show you some of these right out of the gate. Where we've already talked about this, where the U.S. was quietly deploying troops in Congo, where we know that there is already an attempt at a coup. We already even in the past have caught them where they were arrested, caught, they're publicized, and then the U.S. convinced them to send them back home, and then nothing happened about it. More than once this has happened. And it's very clear why, at least in the one example, is for things like cobalt, which is shockingly important to the U.S. government at this point, thinking all the future that they want that most of us don't in regard to electric vehicles and everything else. But here's an article from Barron's just simply highlighting Americans, a Brit among those in the Congo, in Democratic Republic of Congo, in a coup bid. And there's some, actually, I might have, let's see. Yeah, I did have some screenshots. Hold on one second. Then I thought it would stick around, but it didn't, I guess. Nope, it's not that one. I could just read through it, but I think there was not that one. Oh, well. In any case, the point here is this simply highlighting the idea that there were Britons, there were Brits, there were Americans. And I believe there's some argument there was some Canadian overlap too, but this is kind of, a lot of this is up in the air. And I think that there is, both with this and the helicopter crash we're going to get to, the main point to recognize here is that this is kind of an ongoing, both of them are stories that are ongoing, and that there are two things always happening when that's going on. People in positions of power or, tangential to this that want to manipulate it for whatever reason, that will flood the conversation with nonsense to drive it in their direction for their benefit. The people that are involved and don't want you to see what's going on, that try to downplay and sidestep and, muddy the waters about the conversation. That's always going on, guys. That's always happening. And I just think we need to always recognize that. So there's going to be information that flies around when you have ongoing stories. That's why we have to be as objective as possible and prove and source and ultimately be okay saying we don't know when that's the case. Now, it says a number of Americans and a British man were part of a group responsible for a coup attempt in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the capital in early Sunday, so yesterday, according to a spokesman general. The coup bid was led by Cristian Malanga, this is the interesting part to me. This is a person who is in the government, but I've talked about him before, if you remember, and this is the interesting overlap to previous examples. This is a guy who seems to be cultivated by the U.S. government, who literally went to the U.S., started a political party that was then like this. This is the part that I think is most relevant. Now, it's certainly possible this guy could have done it on his own accord, done it because he wanted to take power. I mean, there's plenty of examples, but we need to realize how routine this is for the U.S. government or the Israeli government or people that have done this in the past for their own interests, especially when it comes to things like rare earth minerals. The attack took place outside the residence of the economy minister in the Gombe area in the north of the capital. Yeah, it does say the group was made up of several nationalities. And it says, adding that around 40 of the attackers have been arrested and 4, including Malanga, were killed. And his son was involved as well. It says, we also have a naturalized British subject, the number 2 of the group. Interesting. So if we're talking about the U.S. government being the lead on this, or even potentially Israel, we'll get into why, it's at least seems interesting that the British subject, they argue, is the number 2 of the group. Pretty classic these days for the vassal states of the empire. the group's like, and, I'm sure Britain would like that being the description, but the point is that you can clearly see how they completely bow to the interest of U.S. government. It's just places like New Zealand and Australia are the same at this point. That's not meant to insult any Brits out there, if that's not the right use of it. Is it Britons or Brits? I've heard both, but in any case, people from Britain. And I'm going to leave it there in general. I think the point was here, ultimately, that we know that they were Americans and Brits that were involved. The question really is that then from a official standpoint? Were they sent there by their governments? Was there some kind of other overlap? Or were these, in regard to at least the one we can prove, an Israeli-American, was that coming from another side? Were these people involved for a different reason? These are questions we should be asking. Now, from the New York Times, the Congolese army says it foiled a coup involving Americans. Now, it says, in addition to the footage of a bloodied white man on the ground, actually, here, I'll just play this one for you first so you can see this. This is from African News Feed. Democratic Republic of Congo, armed forces repelled an attempted coup d'etat involving Congolese and foreign fighters on Sunday morning. And you interestingly show these two. Now, at first, this confused me because neither of these people are this guy, but as both the New York Times and others highlight, they're showing these two. I believe this one is the son of the politician in Congo. And then they have this passport, which they're alleging is an Israeli American. And then there's also another American, apparently. Those two are not actually shown, at least as far as I can see so far. I'm sure somebody has footage out there somewhere. But this is clearly an American passport. Now, Benjamin Rubin is the name on there. Well, technically, it's Zalman Poland Benjamin Rubin, which is interesting. And apparently, Zalman Poland is a very, very, very common Ashkenazi Jew Israeli name, which doesn't prove that he's Israeli. But the point is, that's what the coverage has been so far. Here's what it says. Addition to the footage of the bloodied white man we just showed you on the ground, sitting beside someone identified as Mr. Malanga's son, an American, images also circulated showing the passport of another American, Benjamin Rubin Zalman Poland. Now, I've seen people reverse that, in fact, where they show the other two first, but either way, said to be involved in the episode. News reports previously identified him as a cannabis entrepreneur. This is interesting, involved in gold mining. Okay, with Mr. Malanga. Now, we already talked about the gold mining aspect. Robert's written about this in depth, and the idea that this was a central part of the U.S. involvement to manipulating the country, handing these mines to the people that they, essentially like a bribe. Think of it that way. But I think the cannabis overlap is interesting as well, and we'll come back to that. Dino Matani, a former United Nations investigator on Congo, said the Congolese authorities told him in 2018 that they suspected Mr. Malanga of a plot to kill the previous president, Joseph Kabila. So this is something that's already been happening. And the UN investigator was openly saying this in 2018, that he was suspected of trying to kill the previous president. And yet nothing happened, which is interesting. I think that at least would add more possibility to what we were just saying. The logic of it being, let me put it this way. If we're talking about the U.S. potentially being involved, it wouldn't be hard to stop this kind of investigation, seeing as how they have such a strong influence over the UN. And it seems this guy is their guy. But it says a website in Mr. Malanga's name said that his family settled in Salt Lake City in the 1990s as a part of a refugee settlement program. That's interesting. Of course, that will add a lot of fuel to the conversation about how we talk about weaponized migration. Now, not from the two-party illusion perspective that these people are all somehow all guilty for just simply being migrants that are being manipulated, or the fact that we can talk about the ignoring of elements that come from the Israeli side, or they only look at the ones that highlight a bad problem. And I'm talking about the two-party illusion side of this. There is still a real aspect to weaponized migration, and this would be a perfect example of that. He says he participated in the U.S. Army Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps. I mean, this is crazy. So this guy literally trained with the U.S. military. went to the United States as a refugee settlement program. And there's more than that, by the way, and I'll get to it in a second. It says a year later, he returned to the United States where he formed the United Congolese Party in the United States, a grassroots platform that unifies the Congolese diaspora around the world, opposing the current dictatorship. Now, we're realizing that the one he's referring to, or I mean, at the time, let's put it this way, to get into the different ups and downs, there's been many attempts by the U.S. government, some successful in the past, to control this area. So as far as I'm concerned, when we're talking about a U.S. government entity that's being, building a political party in this country, this is what they're known for. That's what the National Endowment for Democracy and all these different groups and USAID, that's what these are mostly covers for. Not that everybody involved is aware of that, ultimately carrying out the same thing the CIA did in clandestine fashion before we were aware of that. That's a direct statement from people involved with these groups, that they do what they used to do in a clandestine fashion today, which is regime change. And the fact that they're opposing the current dictatorship, I mean, it's the same way they would frame anything they're disagreeing with. But, as always, consider other angles, consider whether or not this person could have acted of their own accord. But I think, again, when we have the evidence in front of us, it's hard not to see the same old trappings of regime change that we've seen in the past. It also adds Congo is a focus of American policy in Africa for its deep reserves of cobalt, a key mineral in the production of electric vehicles. China owns or controls most of Congo's cobalt mining producing sites. Now, that is a huge aspect of this. And this is a source of concern to the Biden administration. Well, the only reason that's a source of concern is not because China, the only reason this is a problem is because they don't want China to have that benefit. Which you could argue that that's about democracy. I mean, that feels pretty naive to make that case, especially when you're seeing the U.S. government, the one that's marching around the world and occupying, destroying, and destabilizing countries under a guise of democracy. I'm not saying China is any better. China scares the hell out of me when it comes to their authoritarian, technocratic direction. But the point is that if you compare what's going on around the world, you do not have China marching around the world and destroying countries. You have them making deals. Usually, I could argue in any of these governments using their strong-arm tactics to get a better deal for themselves at the expense of the country, but at least the country's getting something for it. Like, this is my point. If you have a country that is being occupied by the U.S., has been destabilized, calling them terrorists, doing all the things, and they're just reaping all the benefits and outsourcing everything, and China comes along and says, here, we'll make you a deal. You get some. Or they get some benefit to the things the U.S. is just raping their country from. And the point is that they would love that. And I'm not even saying it's all, I can see plenty of deals they've made with groups in Africa that are not bad deals. The point is that it's very different at the very least. So with China controlling one of the most important rare earth minerals, the U.S. government just can't have that. Doesn't matter who they kill, destroy, or destabilize to make sure they get what they want. Just ask the people involved with the Nord Stream pipeline how that works out. But it says, but while most of the region's recent coups have been led by senior military officers from these countries, the purported one in Kinshasa on Sunday appeared to have been led by an obscure opposition politician, based in the United States, and appeared to have little prospect of succeeding. Interesting. I mean, this is what they're framing it as now. Right? And of course, the New York Times, in my opinion, kind of playing its downplaying role in this. Wouldn't we at the very least be, I mean, he already made my points. I mean, the idea it's an obscure opposition political based in the United States. I mean, what? That's like saying you're dealing with a political party in the United States who's running for a position of power that's based in Israel or based in Britain. Like, we'd be like, what? That doesn't really make much sense. And it's as you're supposed to always read this as, well, they're always out there for democracy and freedom. So it's insulting for you to... Does anybody actually believe that? I mean, it's self-evident. Look at I've made the joke many times, which is not really even a joke. The U.S. government is literally batting zero if you pretend they're going for democracy. I mean, every single time they go into, we're fighting for freedom and we want to liberate the country. How did Iraq turn out? How did Afghanistan turn out? How did Libya turn out? How did Syria turn out? How did any of these countries turn out where they just stripped their shoelaces and boop, destroyed the country? We'll do better next time. No, they were designed to do that. That's what they were trying to do. That's what we need to recognize. And that's why these countries are very aware of this. And many people at least assume or have indicated they believe Russia was the one that might have tipped them off, which would make sense to me. But here's, again, we already showed you this, the image of the passport itself. Now here is, Actually, no, I thought this was somebody, a representative. This is somebody else who's posting information, which I thought was interesting, just showing the full image of this person, Benjamin Rubin, and then Marcel Mondi Malanga, who's the son of the politician, were captured. And it just shows you the larger image of this, which is not necessarily important. In case that matters, because people are trying to overthrow a country in violence. So I will make a point too, that it's interesting to me that I guarantee there are some people out there who would make the argument that we're supposed to care more that this person is being arrested and held, because he's an American. Which I don't understand that for most people, whether I'm American or not. Did he break the law? Was he trying to commit a crime? And again, not saying we can prove, well, if you think that this is not enough to make that case, then wait for all the evidence if you think it's going to prove out in a different way. And we could talk about that at the case. I think the evidence is very clear. This was clearly an attempt and clearly involved in American, Israeli, and Britain. My point, though, is that it's interesting that, like, for instance, when a spy gets caught in Iran and they arrest him and they screech about how you're, taking him, how you're kidnapping an American, it's like, well, the guy was breaking the law. It's interesting that we pretend like it doesn't matter simply because it's an American, which, by the way, is what a lot of foreign entities believe is, which creates the resentment even towards average Americans, which I think is largely the point. Sort of a Zionism using the Judaism conversation to create resentment, so it ends up creating what they claim exists. So my point is that this person, just because he's an American, if it's proven to be involved in this coup, should not be treated any differently because he's an American. Especially when we look at the history of U.S. coups and what follows. I mean, just look at Libya. Horrible. Cloud Gateberg points out those who pretend to want change but take shortcuts, like a coup, for example, instead of the hard work of awakening the people, aren't really trying to be radical and fundamental change. They just want the positions, and power, and control. The failed coup in Congo is one of the shortcuts taken by many, including some who try it via political manipulations, not only in Congo, but elsewhere. Oh, and who is this American guy that was part of the coup? It says, such change, in quotes, if it happened at all, as we've seen many times, will be very temporary and self-serving for those who want power instead of fundamental change. Very well put in the end point there, because the reality is they don't want change. They want to maintain destabilization, maintain insecurity so they can reap the benefits. So they can force the country and whoever current warlord, whatever person's willing to bend all the rules, break them all, have no real moral accountability, who will do whatever they say as long as you pay them. That's the kind of people they work with. That's the whole point about this ongoing discussion in the Middle East, where it's provable at this point that Israel, and has for a long time, Israel and the United States have funded the most radical elements of the very thing they claim they're fighting. Why? Because they're willing to do anything where the people that are more moderate don't want to just bend over and let Israel and the U.S. take whatever they want for the benefit of them at the expense of their people. Even if you still argue that they may be more radical than you like. The point is that they weren't radical enough, because they were going, no, we don't want that from you. And so they go to the most radical, the ones that have nothing that are sacred, and they pay them and influence them and then blame the entire concept for being that way. It's inherently disgusting. Like, these people don't care about anything. And that doesn't mean everybody, but clearly we can see a central role here. And down here, it's just simply showing you the same clip. And this is Congo is bleeding, simply saying change in Congo will not come through arms, but through the awakening of national consciousness. What happened today is not what the Congolese government is telling us happened. So everyone seems to be questioning the reality. He's even questioning what they're claiming happened. So bear that in mind. Now this is where it gets very interesting to me. This is a kind of a smaller TV channel representative simply saying the gang leader of the attackers, Malanga, who you're going to see in this video, has been preparing for a very long time to overthrow the power of the capital. Now, the point is that this is not news. I mean, even the New York Times made that clear. Even the United Nations had said he was trying to do that. But it says he was shot dead. Oh, no, it says he was discreetly supported by some Western countries and Israel. He was shot dead by the valiant soldiers of the Republican Guard. Now, here is a video of him speaking with the IDF in Congo. Look at that. There he is shaking hands with the people from the IDF. This guy right here is the one that got shot, who was involved with the coup. the one that's the only one that seems that's unquestionably provable that he was involved, he got shot. And, you could argue that the entire narrative is being manufactured, but I think there's more than enough evidence to see that that's not the case. But here it is talking with the IDF in Congo. So what are we talking about? It's obvious that there's some connection there, right? That has to matter. Absolutely. Here, as Pelham points out, now this is something that I've seen. This is in regard to the fact that this person is a mercenary. That's not something that I can verify. But American-Israeli Benjamin Rubin has been captured after a failed coup in Congo. Rubin she claims a paid mercenary by former head of Israel's Mossad spy agency Yossi Cohen and Jewish billionaire Dan Gertler. This is the second failed coup by Yossi Cohen, who is banned from entering the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now remember, there's a huge overlap to this with the blood diamond industry, which is a huge amount of revenue for Israel in general. And I think that if that's called into question, especially right now, I would think you would see some pretty desperate action. Maybe that's what we're looking at. Now, this person comments saying this is a great point. We're talking about an Israeli American. And the point being, well, this is an example of the dual citizenship problem. Do you see how an Israeli can implicate America while working for Mossad as a double agent? This is an example of the identities of the deep state. Name another group that has this flex in America. Right? I mean, the point is you could argue that's just like a false flag kind of concept. And more than that, just the idea that it's somebody who is acting under, again, what's mostly reported right now is an American. Why is it that we're leaving off the other part of that? Now, Pelham also reports, in regard to Congo, the Biden administration is set to allow a Jewish billionaire, Dan Gertler, to cash out his mining positions in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has enraged human rights activists. Gertler is responsible for thousands of child slaves, that's what she's showing right here, which is undeniably provable, in his illegal cobalt and diamond mines in the DRC. If as always, we don't just take tweets for face value. This is the reality. Here's May 17th from Times of Israel. U.S., quote, exploring limited sanctions relief. Why? For Israeli mining magnate Dan Gertler. So this is what we're talking. This is literally, they're talking about removing sanctions to allow this person to cash out of an ongoing, this is incredible to me. And I think there's obviously something in flux around this entire endeavor. And I guarantee that makes the Israeli government very uncomfortable. This is just an Israeli billionaire who's being allowed, like nobody else would, or potentially considering allowing him to cash out. And who's going to buy in? Who are they buy? Who is he buy? Who is giving him the money? That's interesting. Now, here is a local report about this, the strange coup. And it says, in the early hours of Sunday, the 19th of May, an attempted coup took place, which was thwarted by the army. According to the Congolese authorities, a group of at least 20 armed men in combat gear attacked the palace of the nation, where the president, Felix, that's right. I wanted to make sure I said this correctly. President Tshisekedi. Felix Tshisekedi, where the president Tshisekedi's offices are located after attacking the nearby home of the economy minister. In the shootout with the regular military, at least 3 attackers lost their lives, as well as 2 police officers guarding the economy minister's house, including their leader, Cristian Malonga Masumari, while the remaining members of the command were arrested. Among them were Malonga's son, 22-year-old Marcel, as well as several U.S. citizens, at least one British citizen. Cristian Malonga Masumari was the leader of the small political party he founded, the U.S. registered United Congolese Party. I find that pretty, it's conspicuous, right? I mean, it's very on the surface. It's a U.S. founded political party for the Congo, led by somebody who lived and grew up for them, or at least lived there for a while in apparently Salt Lake City, as the New York Times reports. I mean, that seems a little bit too on the nose. Malonga came to the United States as a refugee, as we just said, in 1998, and settled in the state of Utah, where he lived until 2006. That year, he returned to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where he served in the military and achieved the rank of captain. In 2011, he ran in the opposition in the parliamentary elections, but was arrested before the election, which they cried foul, right? In 2012, he returned to the United States. So get this. So he lives in the United States from 1998 to 2006. then decides to move back to Congo and decides to immerse himself in the political sphere. That's interesting. Then he gets arrested. And the point was, the time they were accusing him of, what do you think? Working for a foreign government. He leaves, goes back to the United States, founds this party, and then goes back and gets more. And how do we ignore that clear overlap? Now, it says in 2013, Malonga was appointed ambassador to the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, which was a Washington-based coalition of 52 non-governmental organizations. Now, it doesn't immediately mean or prove, because he's so immersed with the U.S. government, that this is exactly what it looks like. But come on, guys, we have to be honest with everything else. Of course, I believe that's exactly what it is. But just these points alone, only a willfully ignorant person is not aware of the usual situation that the U.S. government is involved in. When they have their Washington-based coalition, it's usually rife and packed full with the people that we know are not what they're pretending to be. I mean, their chief ally are Saudi Arabia and Israel, for crying out loud. It's very clear that they are not morally sound at this point, guys. And it says in 2016, he was part of a British-backed delegation. So British, which explains the coup we're talking about, of African leaders that traveled to Tbilisi in Georgia, the country. The Americans arrested, including Benjamin Rubin Zalman Poland of Maryland and Cole Patrick. Both were business partners of Malonga in the medical cannabis and e-cigarette business. E-cigarettes, vaping. Of course it is. In Mozambique, where they founded the company CCB Mining Solutions. Rubin Zalman Poland was arrested in the U.S. in 2014 for drug trafficking. So this guy was already, there's a couple ways you can look at this. And this is the guy that's supposedly the Israeli American. The point is that we're talking about somebody who was already arrested in the United States in 2014 for drug trafficking, which I understand it is some kind of ongoing up in the air situation. What does that tell you? That to me suggests very clearly that if, let's just say, everything else is not the reality, that somebody who is compromised, who could have been used in this way. You know, the way that they ask someone, hey, you do this for us and you won't go to jail. Certainly possible. Just one of the many things that we're considering. Here is another, it's from Vanguard. Democratic Republic of Congo's army accuses America of involvement in the failed coup. The passport of one of the Americans allegedly involved in the failed coup of Zalman Poland, Benjamin Rubin, has been posted on social media, as you guys have seen. Americans' alleged involvement in this coup comes after a series of armed attacks organized by members of the U.S. private military company, Bancroft, in the Central African Republic, targeting mines belonging to none other than Chinese companies. Well, look at that. Most recently, Gaga's gold mine in May 12, 2024. See, right there, we've come full circle already. We already see the reality here that this, at least in this sense, was aimed at competition of China owning the mines that the U.S., or at least the U.S. infrastructure, coveted. And so what we're talking about is a coup that came after continuing armed attacks by members of a United States private military company, Bancroft. Now, this is the whole point about the plausible deniability, or the idea that you can have, we're no longer in Afghanistan, a complete lie, because we know whether, quite frankly, I think it's quite easy to prove that they even still have U.S. personnel, but we're talking about military contractors or proxy groups. That's what they are. That's just what they constantly do. So when we realize a U.S. private military company is acting in their interests against the groups that they're clearly against, I think that is self-explanatory. It says the U.S. Embassy in the DRC has denied any U.S. involvement, of course, in the coup attempt, and as does the justifications and statements of the U.S. Embassy in the Central African Republic regarding the illegal activities of its citizens, agents, and PMCs in the Central African Republic. It says, for many political activists in Africa, the United States is intensifying the struggle for political influence. That's the China dynamic in the region, and has now moved on to more violent actions, or continues them. Though non-governmental organizations, or through NGOs like USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, totally not non-governmental, but that's the game, and its citizens, agents, and private military companies, the U.S. is conducting a series of violent actions in order to impose its policy in the Central African region. I mean, is this even hard? This is like what U.S. government 101, guys. This is very easy to wrap your mind around. It says political activists in Africa, and that the chain activists in Africa add that the chain of U.S. violence will continue, and leaders of Central African countries must be extremely vigilant regarding the activities of U.S. citizens and organizations in their countries. It's funny how the U.S. government, going back a long time, World War II and before, really pressed the idea of the fifth column. You know, can't allow other dangerous people from other countries or Americans that are influenced by them to sabotage what we're doing, which of course is real. That's everywhere in the world. You're going to have people, both local and not local, who are either influenced or part of something that will try to act for the interest of other. But guess who does that more than anybody in the world? The U.S. government. It's all on the surface. They have entire programs. What do you think things like Voice of America, these different groups are? That's what those are. So just recognize that the whole every accusation is an admission kind of thing. Here is an insulting example. I'm going to play a clip from this later in the show if we get to it. Joe Biden on the 19th, literally on the day that this is breaking down, or really not the exact day, but the ongoing reality of it right up until the 19th, he gives a speech with the flag for Congo behind him. I mean, it's just almost like an insult. I mean, this person is going, thank you for drawing attention to it. But, you know, realistically, as I think it's self-evident the U.S. government is involved in some way, it's almost too much on the nose for me. Or just insulting that you pretend that you're fighting for a group that you're actively and historically destabilizing for your own benefit. But I'll include the shows we did recently, or the coverage of this. This is a show I just recently did, and this gets into a lot of the stuff I touched on here that go in much deeper. Hey, this was also about Haiti. Same conversation, really. Haiti fights to end Western exploitation. Congo continues to be manipulated, and Israel defeated itself. That's the ongoing thing. I made that claim the first week of this, that they already lost. And I don't even just mean militarily, but I think that's all becoming clear to everybody. But the reality here is that you can see the fingerprints, guys. And in this one, I go deep in the conversation of the mines and how you can prove this. There's entire articles written by Israeli media, documentation, admissions, showing that this is the reality. And that the U.S. government turns a blind eye as they accuse anybody else even for a fraction of the same. This was one I wrote personally in 2016, the Congo uprising and the CIA stooge. And this overlapped with a lot of the stuff we're talking about today. And this one was 2019 from Jason Ditz from antiwar.com. U.S. quietly deploys troops to Gabon amid fears of unrest in Congo, which is, you know, on just the main central point of this. Remember this? This is from Zero Hedge, I believe, 2018, from this orc-looking character who is a U.S. politician or U.S. intelligence apparatus kind of guy. Former CIA chief admits U.S. meddling in foreign elections, quote, for their own good. He was on, I think it was MSNBC when he said that. Laughed about it. It's so grotesque how obvious a lot of this is. Now, on that same note, this is how absurd this is getting. And I genuinely believe that this is the genie's out of the bottle with this, guys. Now, there's going to be other things that are going to swing around, new narratives and new agendas. But my point is the idea that the United States government, which, by the way, I think has been gone for a long time, is this altruistic entity that's saving everybody and spreading democracy, is insulting. I don't think even Americans are lapping this up anymore. Only people trapped in the two-party illusion. And really, increasingly just on the right at this point. That doesn't mean we have to hate the country. The point is that we're talking about the country versus the government. And that, of course, when the right really blends those together. They're not the same thing. Your government is simply representatives of you. At least that's what we're told how it's supposed to be. You are the country. As the people, we are the country. Right? So to say you hate the country is to suggest you hate everybody in this country. And I think that's ridiculous. What we're talking about is disdain for a criminal entity that does not care about you. And in fact, is quite evidently, self-evidently working on in the interest of a foreign country at the expense of our interests. And many of the people in the two-party illusion will scream to defend that, thinking they're fighting for America or realizing they're not and not caring. But here's Matt Miller. You know, the one that's been screaming that they're not committing any crimes in Israel right up until his last thing he said. Nothing. Not a crime. They have no evidence of committed. I mean, think about actually standing by that. Here's what he says. International law demands that Russia pay for what Putin destroyed. Think about saying that right now, especially with how much destruction is on full display. Even think about that just pretend their entire narrative is true, even though it's verifiably not. Does that just say Hamas is there? So that's okay. You destroyed every school and every hospital and I don't know how they think this is making sense to anybody. Maybe it's just desperate. But then to come out and say international law demand that Russia do the thing that we're very clearly not applying to Israel. It says it's also what the Ukrainian people deserve. But Palestinians just don't matter, apparently. We're working with the G7 partners to remedy the damage that Putin continues to cause. It's just so embarrassing. Because they know that we see this in most cases, right? They must. Here's what he said. I'll let you hear it.
One more crucial step that we can take, making Russia pay for Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. What Putin destroyed, Russia should and must pay to rebuild. It's what international law demands. It's what the Ukrainian people deserve. Our Congress has given us the power to seize Russian assets in the United States. We intend to use it. We're working with our G7 partners to see that Russia's immobilized sovereign assets are used to remedy the damage that Putin continues to cause.
And I mean, at least I don't know what assets he's specifically talking about here, but in my experience, in most cases, that ends up being Russian assets, right? Some rich oligarch, which probably is not an honest person. But my point is, it's the illegality of what they do, the rampant lawlessness. Nod to George Galloway. I love that phrasing. That they just steal a yacht from a Russian oligarch and act like we're going after the government. I mean, this is absurd, and it's mafia. I mean, I was actually rereading Whitney's book again, and just the concept of the overlap of this mafia tactic, right? Like just very clearly that's exactly what they are, just giving themselves a different name.
The G7 can unlock billions of dollars and send a powerful message to Putin. The time is not on his side.
So you're going to seize assets under the argument that Putin, which by the way, they're still in an ongoing situation. Like the idea that you're pretending like in the midst of this, you're going to jump in as you have to pay for all of this. Well, I mean, the bottom line is that the entire premise of their argument is false. What's going on is not a one-sided act of aggression. That's childishly stupid. Now, you could even make the argument that the beginning of what happened in Gaza was not, but I still disagree with the overall point there because of how long this has been happening. Well, let's just say you woke up on October 7th and pretended everything started right there. After 7+ months of ongoing destruction, with even their admission that there's barely been any rockets flying after the first 3 months because they ran out of things they need, it's clear that this is not some response of defense. And by the way, it's still ongoing in the same concept. The point even they would make is that we have to, wait for this to be finished. We're not going to worry about this or that until we're done with our engagement. It's just everything they do is one-sided. Everything they do is hypocritical. They apply it in a selective way to the people they don't like. We're in elementary school or high school, and that's what people are beginning to recognize, that these people are not worthy of your respect. They're not worthy of anything but disdain, in my opinion. I'm not talking about just any American politician or anybody in power. I'm talking about these people because of what they're doing, because of how obviously they do not believe in any of the things that they push forward because they know we believe them. Decensored News highlighted this very well in regard to Sam Husseini just continuing to call out this complete liar, Patel, and ultimately asking about the Geneva Convention. And pushing it so well in such the right moments to make it unbelievably clear that they're avoiding even acknowledging that Israel's bound by it. Watch it for yourself. It's a 6-minute clip, I believe. Yeah, it's really well done. And here's what Shea Bose had to say about this. Department of State making a similar argument. Congress has given us the power to seize Russian assets in the U.S., and we intend to use it. Just absolute criminals. We're working with the G7 partners to see that Russia's immobilized sovereign assets are used to remedy the damage Putin causes. Now, do you believe that's going to go back to Ukraine? You'd be quite naive to think that. I guarantee they're going to, even if you think some of it's going to go to building things, let's say, just like Iraq and every other example you look, it's going to go to outsourced American companies that ultimately maximize their benefit at the expense of the country. And it's what happens every single time. If you really wanted to help the country, you would find local companies to do it so you could help the economy. They never do that. It says and the point here is that they highlight, I presume Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Cambodia, Iraq, Korea, and Serbia can all expect to receive their $1 trillion compensation checks from you any day now, right? Hypocrites. Come on. Nobody honest can actually stand back and act like this makes sense when more than any other government I've ever seen in my life, any other country being led by a belligerent government ever. It's destroyed, in the context of let's just say in current living memory, destroying so many countries, leaving them in complete tatters with the argument being you're going to do this for freedom and democracy. Even if you accidentally went the wrong direction, aren't you still responsible? Of course not. It's just insulting. Arnaud Bertrand writes, imagine if that principle pretending that they have to rebuild all of this based on what's going on, actually applied universally. How much the U.S. would need to repay for countries destroyed over the years. Instead, when they left Afghanistan, not only didn't they repay anything, there too, they stole the country's reserves. And realize, guys, they mined the mountains while they were there. They called it defraying the cost of assistance, otherwise known as destruction and destabilization, and the poppy fields and everything else we've discussed. He says, best proof you're going to get that the only rule they follow is might is right. In fact, that's become a very almost on the surface argument. Donald Trump made that very clear. Here is Stefanik. What she says here is incredible. Now, my honest opinion, she's sitting here in Israel, which again, why in the world are members of Congress so frequently going to just Israel to make statements about Israel? I think we all know the answer to that. The point is, here she is, and here arguing that basically America is based on, like, I mean, the way she makes this sound is that Israel has an ideology. Israel has the belief system, and that's like, and that we're like them. You know, aside from the fact that the United States was created long before Israel was, but you know, let's always slant it towards this concept. I mean, it's in my honest opinion, she's reading this piece of paper. I genuinely feel like she was handed this and she read it. That's my opinion. But listen for yourself.
I come here to Jerusalem. I sense a shared destiny, one embedded in your national anthem, Hatikva, the hope. Israel is indeed a miracle, an outpost of freedom, of Western values, of civilization, a striking example of human potential, the physical embodiment of Herzl's maxim, if you will it, it is no dream.
You know, aside from all the ethnic cleansing, rape and murder and pillaging, absolute destruction, ongoing ethnic cleansing, you know, aside from all of that, yeah, all about Western values and civilization, right? Maybe if we're talking about Western government values, well, then absolutely. It's just, it's insulting to have somebody stand there and patronize us all, acting like we don't have eyes, that we can't very clearly see what they're doing, that they proudly announce it, that they do dances around. I'm going to show you clips in a minute, you know, an hour or so probably, of these IDF soldiers playing on the toys of dead children in Gaza, or throwing their Chinaware out the, you know, or murdering people in cold blood, laughing about it. But yeah, it's all because clearly you either are too completely lost to see any of this or something has compromised you. There's no way we can act like this is an honest situation. No way.
It's the same founding ethos that we prize in America, the American dream, which says that with hard work, the right values, you can build a life for yourself, your family, and your community. At the expense of an entire other family, right? Is that how that ends? That we can remove that family that we don't like, the different color, that we can say, we don't want them there. Here's our dream on top of your dead one. Freedom, democracy. Herzl's dream and the American dream. These dreams are precious, and we must cherish, protect, and fight for them. We know we have different. So this is my point, though. So so in what world are we talking about something that's 75 years old? Or more than that, really, but the foundation of Israel at the very least, and the conversation that is, you know, one and the same. Like, anybody honest would frame this as, if you think they're the same, which they're not, that Israel adopted our concept as a much longer established country. But this is my point. These people are very clearly influenced to such a strong degree that they do things that are not just for Israel, but at the expense of Americans. And if everyone out there trying to scream that this is about Jews, you're the one making that problem. I say this constantly. Only Zionists and racists are making this about Judaism. Like the person I'm arguing with online right now, the idea that all you can ultimately say is you just secretly, wink, wink, hate Jews. And it's painful. I mean, it's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for them. Like I said the other day, feel free to make the argument that you think that I'm somehow missing it, that I'm being manipulated by secret Jew haters, and I don't even know. Of course, that's possible. But to just make the argument that they know that I secretly feel a certain way, despite the fact that I explicitly say the opposite and everything I do shows that we're absolutely fighting for Jewish people, Muslim people, Christian people, anybody who are being oppressed and lied about, as we can see with the campus protests that are being run in many cases by Jewish organizations with Holocaust survivors, but apparently we're anti-Jewish because we point at that. I mean, I'm embarrassed for these people. It really is that bad. And again, I think some of them are just so lost in this conversation that they don't recognize it. And I'm not saying that about people like this. I am absolutely convinced that people like this are either compromised or are being, are opportunists. That they take money from AIPAC and everything else, and they let that influence everything they do. Realistically, if this was at any other time, this could be called treason.
Difficult days ahead to ensure this always remains true. Prime Minister Netanyahu recently said that if Israel must stand alone, it will.
And so what does that even mean? You mean aside from the constant bowing and scraping of people like you and the entire U.S. government? Where's this world in which Israel stands alone? They have the power structures behind them in every single point. What they're really talking about is the fact that public opinion has been lost. We now see them, the Zionist entity and the Israeli government, and the crimes they've committed. Many are also Jewish, but keep pretending like we wink hate all the Jews. People like this are caught. What they're doing is illegal, in my opinion, at this point. They are absolutely acting in the interest of a foreign country.
I am here to tell you that it is our duty as Americans that Israel does not stand alone.
How is that our duty as Americans? You're telling me it's my duty as an American to stand with a foreign country because you say so? I mean, just think about how wild that is. Our duty as Americans is to protect the Constitution and protect fellow Americans and help maintain the things that we hold sacred. None of that has to do with a 75-year-old ethnic cleansing settler colonial project.
We must never let Israel stand alone. I am confident in the end that our relationship will not just endure, but emerge stronger than ever before. Israel, keep fighting. We are with you. God bless Israel, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you for this tremendous honor.
God, that's just so shocking. And remember, I called this person out. I still generally don't even know who she is. I didn't know. I didn't recognize her when I first saw it. Where she was the one that was like, and I forget who else said it, that her entire career seems to be hinging on this aggressive push to frame the world as in some dark cloud of anti-Semitism. I remember, and she was the one that was calling out the campus presidents, which was completely backed by all the rabid right-wing people that wanted to go after them because they were woke and they don't like the way they think, which many of them were. But it just shows you that they're being manipulated, using that kind of perception of the woke mindset to attack people that at that point didn't deserve it. They were not saying anything other than what was generally the reality, that people are out there saying things that you're taking out of context. People are not saying, we're going after the Jews. And this has been made very clear by other Jewish people, in fact. People like Michael Tracy online, or people like Glenn Greenwald, who broke this down in in every way. Scathingly went over every single angle of this, and you can prove that everything they're framing it as is not just dishonest, but completely manufactured. Not to say that there's not racism or other examples of pretty minor, benign actions of violence. And I mean that in the sense of people getting, pushing back and forth. There is everything they're highlighting in this conversation is based on absolute lies. I mean, it's not my opinion at this point. I mean, I just recently played the Glenn Greenwald breakdown where he makes this very clear. And of course, they're going to start calling him an anti-Semite, even though he's Jewish himself, because this is ridiculous. But realizing that my point was that she was the one leading that investigation, and her hands were shaking while she was like screaming over the top of them, and you could tell that she was out of her depth. And some of them even resigned. And I'm not going to, I probably disagree with most of the things they believe. And I'm pretty what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I just believe the college structure today is a complete scam, quite frankly. And I think a lot of people understand that. But regardless of any of it, the point is that they were simply showing you that they were not just, there wasn't the lie that they were pushing forward, and they cast them aside anyway. Now, let's get into the conversation of the crash. Now, just before that, we're going to come back to the conversation of Israel in a second. I mean, even the crash itself seems to implicate Israel and the United States. But it's really important that we recognize that this is striking. It's obvious. These people do not believe about international law if they're willing to ignore every single thing that contradicts that when it comes from their allies, from themselves. How can they? And that never used to be quite seen by everybody. And I think, again, what Israel did, the 7 months of ongoing genocide that shook everybody awake from all this, that can't be put away. Now we see it. Plenty of average people that have never even thought to question the ongoing democracy around the world they're spreading have now seen it, and they can't put it away. And they trot out people like this to try to push you back in. And these are cartoons today. These people are not worthy of your respect. Here's from Associated Press, another example of something that I think is very easy to connect back to the very same people we're talking about because of the many different times they've discussed this kind of conversation, even threatened to assassinate these people. Statements from Lindsey Graham, for example. But then you get into all the facts and even the statements already made by Israel and their tangential outlets. I mean, at the very least, they want you to think they did this. But it says helicopter crash that killed Iran's president and others could reverberate across the Middle East. Now, this is my point about how these platforms work. It's insulting that they try to water this down with all of the lies that I'll prove to you again are lies. And again, the fact that it's coming from Jerusalem seems interesting to me. I mean, that's not, unless I'm unaware that they're now only based out of Jerusalem. I find it interesting that the overlap seemed to be coming from Jerusalem in most of these cases, from AP. But in any case, it says the helicopter crash in which Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, the country's foreign minister, and other officials were killed and is likely to reverberate across the Middle East, where Iran's influence runs wide and deep. It's just, the whole thing is meant to be like this, downplay that this was a criminal action, but without saying it, sort of make it seem acceptable because look at all the bad things that Israel says they're doing. But that's not, it's from any of these situations we cover. Is it somehow that, oh, well, this person deserved it, so the law doesn't matter? Well, not when it applies to their adversaries. Same thing with Israel bombing Syria all the time and just going, well, Iran's there. Well, that's not a crime. Okay, who cares? We'll move forward. There's nothing more than that. They just go, well, Iran, bad guy, and they're doing bad things, and we think they're terrorists. Okay, none of that means anything. There's not a crime being committed. They're there legally. They're allies with Syria. Even if you're talking about weapons shipments, it's not a crime, guys. They're allies. They can sell weapons back and forth, just like the U.S. does with the worst people in the world, in fact. So the fact that they keep doing it shows you that they are very clearly showing you that they believe they're above the law, and in many cases, they appear to be. At least as it comes to the U.S. government, their control of it. When their influence runs wide and deep, they're really trying to create the idea that this is somehow justified. He goes, that's because Iran has spent decades supporting armed groups and militants in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Palestinian territories. Well, yeah, they do support them. They support their right of self-defense, the actual reality of a occupied territory with armed resistance, and the idea that these places are occupied, are suppressed, are in fact being attacked. So they support that. But anything more than that, I argue there's very clear support in ways that you could prove in some cases, like weapons the general things you might expect for allies. The argument that they're proxy elements, which is really where I'm going with that, is, I think, ridiculous. And in fact, the State Department and plenty in the past have admitted that fact. It's like we'll show you next with the idea of the nuclear program, which we know is also even the State Department, or rather, I'll come to it next. The U.S. government admitted that's not what's happening, but they still spread these lies. Are we to believe that the Associated Press isn't aware of its own article where it says that? We'll come back to it. But it says that's because they've spent decades supporting all these groups, which, by the way, if you look at every single one of them, they're all fighting against occupying territories for their freedom, but they're all terrorists, apparently, allowing it to project power and potentially deter attacks from the United States or Israel. Right, so they're working with allies to stop those people, the U.S. and Israel, from attacking them? What terrorists? This is the sworn enemies of the Islamic Revolution. You mean the time when they took it back from the U.S. and Israel occupation? We'll just leave that part out. That was Operation Ajax. But it says tensions have never been higher than they were last month when Iran, under Raisi and Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at Israel in response to an Israeli attack on a consulate. Yeah, that's how you cover that? You mean the monumental violation of international norms of the bombing of an Israeli consulate, which was a huge shift in policy? But that's the small thing. They responded with drones and bombs because of the thing Israel did. That's how they frame this in everything that they do. Well, the point should be Israel attacked an embassy, the consulate building of an embassy, with killing generals, killing officers, killing innocent people from other countries. And that's a huge deal. And so Iran, in the right of their actual right of self-defense, attacked. And even then, I would argue, as always, that's not actual self-defense. It's just the legal right to respond to the attack. Self-defense is responding as you're being attacked. But that's, of course, not a big deal. It's only because Iran did something. That's the thing we care about. But it says Israel's long viewed Iran as its greatest threat because of their controversial nuclear program. Just so we're clear again, this is the AP from last year, July. U.S. intelligence assessment says Iran not currently developing nuclear weapons, because they're not. And also in this article, which I won't get into for time, they make the argument that somehow that they're violating. The point is always is that the United States government pulled out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, and in that very deal gave them allowances to begin increasing enrichment because they broke the deal until they were to come back. Now, you can argue that they've gone beyond whatever limit was set within that conversation, but the point is that there is no deal anymore. They broke the deal and they wanted it. Iran wanted this deal to be in place. They wouldn't allow it. And so then the argument that they're now doing what they want to do with their nuclear program is like every other country in the world. The only reason this becomes a problem is because we say Iran bad guy. Israel's got nukes, then we don't even allow them to talk. They pretend like it's not happening, even though everyone in the world knows it's happening. And the reality, even on top of that, is that as I'm not even sure I want to take at face value the claims of 60% enrichment, but they need 90% to even begin to make the material to then make a bomb, and they're not even there, not even close. And the point is, they're even continuing to say that they will bring that back down to the regulation levels of the deal should they want to initiate this deal. I actually argue that that's probably no longer on the table. It was before all this started. My point in all of that is the absurd game they play, where they're acting like they're somehow right on 2 minutes away from a bomb. They've been saying that for 40 years. And routinely, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and even now the United States, has said that's not even actually happening. But who cares, though? Let's break it down in a way that makes it seem like the murdering of these people in the helicopter was somehow justified, if that's ultimately what happened. It says Risi was a hardliner viewed as a protege and possible successor to Khamenei, chastised Israel last month, saying, get ready for this because this is terrorist talk. The Zionist Israel regime has been committing oppression against the people of Palestine for 75 years. Oh my gosh, he said the terrorist thing, right? Or just stating the obvious reality of the illegal occupation. It says, quote, first of all, we have to expel the usurpers. So the people illegally occupying. That makes sense. Secondly, we should make them pay the cost for all the damages. Oh, sounds sort of like this, but we can't apply it to this conversation because that would be equal-handed or equally handed. Oops, here we go. And it says, thirdly, we have to bring the justice to the oppressors and the usurpers. I mean, it's talking about law, basically. But that's the bad thing. They can't say the things if it comes from them because that's terrorism. It's just it's comical. It's bad. The people can see through this today. And I think they're desperately worried about that. My point, though, is that the overall point about the usurpers and expelling them, if you listen to what they're saying today, they're talking about the Zionist entity. They're not just talking about every single Israeli. I guarantee there are people that feel that way. And even then, the reality would be technically that would be the legal justification. It would be legally sound. But nobody really who has standing in this conversation is making that argument. I'm not either, because it doesn't really make sense. It would be, in a way, creating a similar problem in reverse, and I don't think that's justified. The eye for an eye concept is not something we should be going for. The point is that they want to get rid of the occupiers, the Zionist entity, have them pay damages for what they created, and bring them to justice. But of course, when you frame it as the thing they want you to hear it as, well, that's when it becomes dangerous. Point is clear. I think that they're trying to make it sound like this was okay. Now let's get into the details of what happened. There's Khamenei simply saying, with deep sorrow and regret, he has received the bitter news of the killing of the president, which it was only as of today, early 4 a.m. Because it was yesterday. There seemed to be some confusion, and we'll get into why I think that is, about what happened, and it was a hard crash, and and even seemingly putting out sentiments that it was not, that they didn't die. Now, I think there's a couple reasons for that, why that might have happened. One, we'll get into, being that this was coming from an unfriendly source, or people that were pretending to be somebody making these statements, and we'll show you what I mean by that. Or it could be that they were just trying to downplay. That's always what happens, right? They don't want people to know that they had got the plan, or they want to downplay how well the operation went. But Loki points out something interesting yesterday. He says it is noteworthy that the last meeting of the Iranian president wasn't actually with the Azerbaijani president. Israel has established an intelligence base, an airfield, and an agreement to develop 2 new surveillance satellites from Azerbaijan. All of that is about Iran. Interesting. Israel accounts for almost 70% of Azerbaijan's significant weapons imports. Now, is that worthy of, like, this? The same, to imply their actions equally would be to argue that Iran could bomb Azerbaijan whenever it wants because they say Israel's present. killing civilians, bombing the hospitals, bombing the airports, but saying, well, Iran, and then having the rest of the world go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's crazy. It's illegal. It is rampantly lawless. But he says that the 70% of Azerbaijan's significant weapons imports coming from Israel, that's billions of dollars worth of ballistic missiles, air defense systems, and kamikaze drones. Billions. All of that necessitates an increasing integration of military operations between the two, of Azerbaijan and Israel. He says at least 40% of Israel's oil is supplied by Azerbaijan via a pipeline that runs through Turkey. 1 month into the Gaza genocide, a joint venture between Azerbaijan's state oil company and Israel Natural Gas Lines was signed to export gas to Israel. He says, as Israel's #1 customer for arms, the Zionist entity is more deeply embedded within the military system of Azerbaijan than anywhere else. Time will reveal more. It's very interesting. So the simple implication being that the meeting there, knowing that that was going to happen, knowing that Azerbaijan is very tied in with Israel, they might have set something up to create this, just as a thought, considering the facts on the table. And this is why people are, certain manipulators and people that just want to follow along with the crowd screech about conspiracy theory. The point is that any researcher, any investigative journalist, anything, you consider possibilities. You theorize. That's what you do. It's not bad to do so. They just don't want you to look at things other than what they hand you. So they scream it's all conspiracy theory. The point is, of course, this is relevant. It may not end up being what happened, but why would you not consider this overlap? It's just bad journalism for people that don't. And that's the other point is not to say that we know because of this. No, that would be assumption. We're just simply highlighting the facts, and people that want to pretend that's what you're doing will make that case. But this person highlights the U.S. Air Force, the C-17 RCH-348 landing at Baku, Azerbaijan. This is on the 19th. That's literally the first time such flights occurred in 1 year. And it has to be now. It happens to be now. So now we're finding out that the U.S. Air Force went to Azerbaijan on the 19th, the day this was going on. And somebody rightly asked, how can we confirm it? Good for them. And they give the link because that's what good. I mean, this is rare, increasingly rare on Twitter today that people provide the source material. But there it is. You can look for yourself. So that's interesting. So we have the U.S. joining, essentially, at some level before this happened, in the location, I mean. Now, on to English, and there's a link here you can read more about it. It simply highlights that, so at this point, after the 19th and after the crash, there was kind of a confusion. And people were arguing they didn't know what happened. They didn't know where the helicopter had crashed. There was all this confusion, which doesn't really make much sense outside of there possibly being some kind of outside electronic interference. But after completing its mission in Iran, Turkish UAV, basically, one of their UAVs went out, and I guess using heat signatures was able to identify what they argued was where the crash took place, which I find interesting. The idea that Turkey somehow was immediately able to find this. I mean, at the very least, the question should be whether that might mean that they weren't somehow involved. I'm not saying there's any evidence to that effect, but I just find that something we should ask, always considering the possibilities. Because Turkey always plays a very interesting role in all these things. Kind of its own island of, within NATO, but essentially it's interesting. But it says identifies location of wreckage of a helicopter carrying the Iranian president, and then weirdly does this. Flies around looking, ends up going all the way over here, and then creating the crescent moon, the symbol of Turkey, as if that's where this was supposed to happen, I guess, like right where the crash was. It's very strange. Very strange. You can read more about it. It comes directly from Andula English. Okay, so here's what Alon Mizrahi points out in regard to the time that it was disappearing. He goes, how does the president's helicopter disappear without a trace for long hours inside of their own country? He goes, think about this. It's bizarre. And to make it even more puzzling, the president's helicopter was one of a group of 3 flying together. Consider the amount of electronic signals such a flight generates. You have the president's security, surely this with satellite communication, and all kind of other secure communication systems. Now, first of all, let's make sure we recognize, despite the screeching lies of the U.S. government in Israel, Iran is very technologically advanced. In fact, more in some cases than both those countries. And the point is that the idea is that, think of like what the Air Force One or any number of, anything flying Biden or them around, what kind of technological advancements and things that they might be using for, just consider that. And he's saying surely with satellite communication and all other kinds of secure communication systems. Then there's the helicopter itself with all its normal and special communication equipment. Finally, there's all the cellular noise all those people are generating, work calls, family calls, long flight. There's always someone on the phone. He says with, VIPs in attendance. And say communication suddenly and totally stops, which is what we're told happened with the president's helicopter. What do the other two pilots do? All the security and military people. Do they just carry on and think, oh, well, they'll probably catch up? No. Or do they stop, mark the exact location of the last known communication, and raise hell, initiating a mega search protocol, which didn't seem to happen until after the crash. He goes, maybe landing as close as possible to the point of disappearance and waiting for search and rescue people to start for work from that spot. The most reasonable explanation for such complete confusion and disorientation is that they were jammed completely using electronic warfare, which I think makes sense. Or maybe fooled into believing that they were still in contact with the president's helicopter, which is interesting, right? So thinking that they were in fact still all in line, but really that plane that had already gotten pulled away, and I'll let him finish his point. He goes, which may explain how nobody knew where it disappeared, even approximately. 2 days ago, Hezbollah took out one of Israel's most advanced intelligence gathering pieces of equipment, a sophisticated, deep-reaching attack into northern Israel. And we know that modern militaries are perfectly capable of cracking, jamming communication lines and fooling other militaries. This could be the freakiest of accidents. Certainly could be. And it could be that a 71-year-old poet decided to assassinate Slovakia's prime minister just as the U.S. was trying to recommit European countries to supplying and supporting Ukraine. Anything is possible, I guess. But I think what's important to think about is the idea of the signal, like basically thinking about the possibility of creating a situation where the person that was manipulated via electronic warfare might think that they're flying normally and they fly into the side of a mountain, or that they think the other one's right next to them and they're not there. This is the kind of level we're at today. I'm surprised we don't get more of this conversation, and I think we know why. Here is Lord Bebo pointing something out. He goes on to say here that, was it a smart GPS sabotage of Raisi's helicopter, the president? The crashed helicopter on which he was flying 212. The Tasnim agency reports that it could carry up to 14 people and had a cruising speed of 190 kilometers per hour. It must be said right away that the Bell 212 helicopter is an old machine, a twin-engine version of the Bell 204-205 developed in the early 70s by Bell Helicopter Textro for the Canadian Armed Forces. Most of these helicopters have already been written off. These helicopters were delivered to Iran back in the days when Iran was ruled by the Shah, who was the occupied force under Operation Ajax, right? The illegal puppet that was put there. Since then, their airworthiness has been maintained by the Iranians. The VIP version has an increased payload, but a shorter flight range and climb rate. All Bell 212s are currently assigned to the Iranian Presidential Air Squadron. The version of the collision on a mountain with a mountain in thick fog, in principle, is logical, right? That you just lose where you're going, but why did they lose the guidance systems and so on? The helicopter did not have any special, and my point would be then why wasn't this, there was no warning signal? Like, this seems to be some kind of a complete blackout situation where everyone's confused until they find them. The helicopter did not have any special navigation equipment for flying blind. That's interesting, right? So you know that should you yank out some of the things they need, they don't have anything that ultimately kicks into in those situations like current vehicles do. And the version of piloting air could be taken as the main one, but there is one circumstance. Immediately after the disappearance of the helicopter, reports appeared that two people flying with Raisi, one of whom that was the helicopter pilot, allegedly got in touch and described the incident as non-fatal, which we know that's not the case. Or at least that's what what all the reporting is highlighting, that he has been confirmed killed. I guess that could also be a lie. But it says when examining the wreckage, it turned out that all the people on board died at the time of the collision. Right? So then who contacted the ground? In fact, diverting search forces away. And most importantly, why? Right? I mean, that's a huge point right there. So we're talking about somebody who got in contact after the fatal crash and said, no, nobody died. So, and diverting the search forces to them. And then after the fact, it turns out they did. So who was that? What happened? And why did they take a time? And my point is, arguably, that could have been somebody else. Not even somebody present. A Mossad or CIA agent, for example. It says, considering that the main navigation device in foggy conditions on board the helicopter was a GPS navigation system, we can assume a version of navigation sabotage is possible, I would say. Having the exact time of departure of the helicopter from the Azerbaijani-Arrakis border point, the Americans could have sharply roughed up the GPS signals in the cell where the helicopter was flying, as a result of which the pilot could have directed the helicopter into a rock, believing that he was flying over a valley in a safe altitude. That's very possible. Mensch Sint points out an Israeli. So now, okay, so forget, we have a U.S. plane that flew into Azerbaijan the day this happened, which apparently hadn't happened in a very long time. Now, on the same day, an Israeli military transport plane, a C-130J, that took off from an Israeli airbase, apparently turned off its transponder before landing in Morocco. I mean, is that not crazy? I mean, to me, that's a huge red flag, obviously. So my point is, you have them flying from here, turning off their transponder. What you're seeing here is the suggested flight rate, like the planned flight path, and then ending up in Morocco, realizing that Iran would be to the west, or the east, the east, to the other direction, right? So if you were going to try to create a plausible deniability here, end up in the other side of the country, or other side of Africa, for that matter, all the way to the wrong direction, maybe that'd be the way to do it. Carry out something, at least being close enough to Iran to be able to execute whatever signal malfunction we're talking about, manipulation, then turning around, going back to Morocco, and then ending my point would be to find out whether or not the time frame was as long as it was supposed to be. I wasn't able to find that out, right? So how long would this flight normally take? And how long did it end up being? That might have us a very important indication. If somebody finds that out, please let me know. Either case, you have an Israeli plane that turns its transponder off at the same day this is happening, an American plane that lands in Azerbaijan, them leaving from Azerbaijan, a very clearly Israeli-influenced group. And then, apparently, Israeli media reports the Iranian president was dead before Iran did. I mean, this is ridiculous. Then this person says they know before the Iranians. That's quite telling. This is what happened, guys. I mean, it's in things like this as well. This is my point, guys. The Israeli war room on May 19th, again, before anybody really even knew what was going on, they tweeted out a helicopter. This is either them wanting you to think they did this or admitting they did this. Either way, it's disgusting. And it says, this person says, you could have at least pretended you were not behind this. Just saying. Think about that. Here is one of the last overlaps that I find to be very interesting. Now, this is very hypothetical. There's a great video on this. But so if we're talking about the idea of simply manipulating the situation with signals, that would mean that you would have to wait for the certain, assume that the weather would be enough to be able to manipulate them so they wouldn't be able to see where they were going, right? But that would be just like a random happenstance, unless you simply ask the question, is it possible to create the weather the way they wanted to look so it was foggy before executing this? Now, of course, this is where all the people out there are going to scream that we're conspiracy theorists. I'm not saying you could prove this. I'm saying it's something to consider. And before we read what he's talking about here, don't forget, Iran, top military officials in Iran have said for many years that Israel is literally using weather modification to stop it from raining and snowing in their country. Which, why in the world would we balk at that right now? Knowing that that's possible, knowing it's been around for such a long time, knowing that Israel has used these things before. Why would they not use it against an enemy that they're trying to starve, which is what they're doing? Just hypothetical, though. We don't know whether it is applying to this conversation. Here's what he says. The account is into thin air. He says, you won't believe this. It seems that Iran or a large portion of the Middle East, and this is the part that you can prove, has apparently removed the entire day of May 19th from the weather charts. Okay. So it takes a lot of willful blindness to not go, okay, so they removed the May 19th from the weather charts, and all the rest of the things we talked about, the Israeli plane turning off its transponder, a U.S. plane being in Azerbaijan right before they leave, all of this stuff. It's kind of hard not to ask what that adds up to. But he goes on to point out what he thinks might be the case. He goes, is this to stop people from seeing the details about what caused the fog that locals said came out of nowhere? And there's a lot of reports about that. Fog that came out of nowhere. You can find that in a lot of different places being reported. This led to the helicopter crash of Iran's president. Why are they hiding the satellite data? Was this weather created? Also attached is the likely video of the crash, its site itself. So first, let's play what Into Thin Air had to say about this.
All right, everybody, welcome back. May 19th, 2024, and I wanted to check out the weather that was taking place while they said the president of Iran was in a helicopter crash, and they said it was due to some weird fog. Now, I'm going to show you something very weird when it comes to the weather in this area called Jaffa. This is where the helicopter crashed. They said it was right here on the border, right near this city, Jaffa, and here's the border right here. So it was in this area somewhere. So what I did was I lined this up with a weather chart. It's not exactly easy to get weather reports for this part of the world, but I did find some, and that is here on the CIRA weather website. A very detailed chart you can use, and here we are. This is the Middle East. We are looking at Jaffa right in this area here. We can't get much closer without it being very pixelated, but I want to show you something interesting. You can see the date up here. We're on May 18th. Now, this happened the morning or early in the day on the 19th, and now it's obviously a whole different time. So as I move this, you're going to notice something weird. We get into nightfall. This is the beginning of the night of the 18th for this part of the world. And as we move forward, you're going to notice something. We're going to get to the end of this bar here where we should be moving into the 19th, which is where we would see the weather and what's going on in this area when the helicopter crashed. But look what happens here. They have removed the entire 19th from the weather chart. You're going to see I'm just about at the end of the data here. Watch, it goes from the 18th right to the 20th. There it goes. Boom. It just pops from the 18th to the 20th, removing the entire 19th day. So
how do we even pretend that's not very clear? Now, I'm not saying that then, like, this is the same kind of thing we point out in other conversations, you know, about the, you know, any number of things where just because something clearly is criminal, or that they, you know, that indicates that they very clearly wanted to hide something, we should not then assume what that something is. But yes, that clearly indicates that there's something that they did not want us to see, which very well could be that they created this, or at the very least that the weather itself, whether created or not, somehow indicates that it shows us that they were involved, you know, whatever. Something is there, though. I don't know how we could pretend that's not the case.
we cannot see what was going on here, no matter what setting I pick here. And I'll just show you on this chart here. This overlay here is meant to be able to see fog, and we'd be looking right in this area here. And again, you move from the 18th across the day. These take a little bit longer to load, but once you get all the way to here, it goes from the 18th to the 20th right there. Again, one click covers an entire day. So they have removed 24 hours of weather from one of the biggest weather charts that exists. This is one of the most detailed charts we can use to find weather all over the world. And we would be able to see exactly what was going on in this area, but they have taken the data away. Once again, I'll show you. Here's May 20th, which is in about 2 hours for the East Coast. But look, I backtrack, it goes right to the 18th. So the entire day of the 19th is missing, so we can't see what was going on in this area. Take that for what it's worth. If anyone can find the radar chart for May 19th of this part of the world, I would love to see it. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
I guarantee you somebody, here's his little thing. He does pretty good work. I'm not super familiar with his work, but I've seen some in the past, and I like it. It's well broken down. What I think somebody out there will have it. There's no way around it, guys. There are people that literally have like channels that all they do is just monitor weather all the time, or have recordings going all the time. So whether it ends up in his hands or not is the question. But I guarantee somebody out there has that. That would be very interesting to see. Just like the idea of the time frame of the flight. These are things this is why they're so afraid of this kind of journalism, of this kind of people that are online doing their own work, their own research, their own due diligence, because they can't stop this kind of crowdsourcing work. But of course, that means that people can lie, people can be wrong, people get very caught up in their own perspectives. But how is that different than the corporate media, right? The point is to be objective and question everything while considering all possibilities. But I find that pretty compelling. Now, here's what he's claiming is the video of what could be, not for sure, but could be the crash site of the crash itself. But there's something interesting going on here. Now, while this is just playing, this is just one of his overlaps. And again, it comes from Andula Agency. So the point is they're simply arguing. And I think this is the drone, like I said, the heat signature they were going for. But as this is playing, just think about doing this while you're committing genocide, while the world is seeing you, while the ICJ is accusing you. We'll get to that next. While the International Court of Justice has already accused you more than once. And you're doing things like this while everyone's paying attention? I mean, again, it's either shockingly desperate or they just don't care. It's incredible. It really is incredible. Now, Let's talk about for a brief moment. Oh, actually, and this was, I already showed you that. This is the idea of that, it's not new to argue that there's weather manipulation that is possible. And then, and I added this last. That's right. I'll tell you, man, Twitter's been acting super wonky for me today. I don't know if this happened to anybody else, but about a couple hours ago, my entire only Twitter crashed for every tab I had up, every one of them. It just crashed all across the board. It was very strange. And they're really slow to load right now. Like when I go to another one, that one didn't work. But anyway, the point is that this is I added this right at the end. This came out today, just recently. This is Zarif speaking to media about his opinion on this. Now, what I want to make clear about this, he's saying U.S. is to blame, but I don't think he's saying this is the only thing. And I think what he's saying is kind of just trying to point out an objective reality for those that are quick to dismiss possibilities. And I think this is a great point. I think there are people that are kind of attacking him for, downplaying the possible involvement. Like, we should not be ignoring the possibility that this was a manipulated weather event. This was a weather electronic warfare event. Definitely, I think there's enough evidence there to suggest that could have been happening. So we shouldn't be dismissing those things. My point is that I don't think he would. In the past, he's always struck me as somebody who's been very objective and very fact-based, despite the screams of the people from Israel and the United States government. But he says the U.S. is to blame for the tragedy of the helicopter crash of the president, which, despite the order of the International Court of Justice, has embargoed the sale of aircraft and aviation parts to Iran. Right? So the point here, ultimately, is that he's suggesting that whether or not there's other events that are involved, simply the fact that they're violating the Court of Justice, which, again, every other thing, they don't care about any of these legalities, and stopping the sale of aircraft and aviation parts is potentially why they, if it was just a simple, normal crash, well, you could at least point to the finger at them for saying that's why we weren't able to update the aircraft. I don't think that's what he's saying is the reality. I don't think that. I think this is just trying to make an intelligent, objective point about whatever you think is happening. Let's make sure we recognize that they're violating International Court of Justice. They're violating the law in every other case. In this sense, they're stopping parts that are needed for civilian transport. That's the point. The real thing is to recognize that these groups are criminal. They are rampantly lawless. They disregard everything that is sacred to them, and they will accuse you of everything under the sun to stop you from seeing what they're doing. Now, let's get into the conversation of the ICC. This is what's crazy to me, is this is happening while all of this stuff is going on. And I'm going to be right out of the gate with this. I do not feel this is going to go in the direction we think it will. I'm very, very worried about how this is going to potentially pacify, but yet not really hold accountable. Maybe with somebody like Netanyahu, which, again, we need to realize nobody likes this guy. People that are powerful because of him will like him insofar they have power. But his own people hate him. His own government seems to hate him. The guy is a criminal with multiple indictments who was this close to going to jail before October 7th. It's very clear that this person is the first to go. And he knows that too, if something were to go this direction. But ICC prosecutor has now openly stated they are seeking and announcing the warrants for Netanyahu, Gallant, and then Hamas leaders, which I find really interesting. And we'll go over this. And I'll show there's two ways I think you can look at this. And I'll wait to make the point about it. But I think the point is, the interesting dynamic is that we know Hamas is funded by Israel. So you could either look at this, at them trying to balance it out, which I think is never honest. Things are never balanced. Because we accuse them, we got to accuse their side too. That's the point, is that when you break this all down, obviously, as I've said many times, Hamas committed crimes. They took children back as hostages. There's no way around it. Pretty much all the rest, it's up in the air for a lot of different reasons in regard to the IDF, Hannibal Directive. I mean, all these different things we've talked about. Even the rape allegations have never been proven. And I was going to do a whole segment about that today. I'll probably do it in the next show. But they're still citing Pramila Patten, who herself has walked that back, and even at the UN spoke and said this wasn't even investigatory. We did not even blamed anybody. And yet they come out and go, they proved it, because they're desperate. But the point is that it could be that they're just trying to play it even-handed and act like, try to avoid the negative fallout for accusing Israel of the crimes they're committing, which it's not working that way for them. They're getting attacked from both Hamas and Israel at this point. Or, I'm hopeful for this, but I don't think it's going to be the case, they're making a special point here of going after the Zionist entity and their proxies. if you want to look at it that way. I don't really, I mean, it's just a thought. My gut tells me that's not the way it's going to go, but it'd be interesting, wouldn't it, if this is going after Israel and the Hamas leaders, not all of Hamas, because of the fact that we can show that these leaders are being protected in Qatar by the Israeli government. Again, hopeful. Don't think that'll be the way it goes, but that's interesting. Now, this writes from Associated Press from Jerusalem. The chief prosecutor of the ICC said Monday he is seeking arrest warrants for leaders of Israel and Hamas, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over his actions taken during the 7-month occupation or war of genocide. They were at war. While Netanyahu and his defense minister, Gallant, do not face imminent arrest, the announcement by the ICC chief prosecutor, Khan, was a symbolic blow that deepened Israel's isolation over the war in Gaza. And then again, either way, like I said before, that is a big hurt. That hurts their agenda. No matter what ultimately happens, that will wake up more average people. The knowing that they have done this, the average person who might be on the fence is going to go, okay, well, they must have looked at the evidence, even though it's rarely how these things work. But the point is, it's interesting, and it's in the direction of shifting opinion, in my eyes, the right way about what the Zionist government is doing. Now, Khan from the ICC accused Netanyahu, Gallant, and 3 Hamas leaders, so even 3 on one side and 1 on the other, where's Smotrich? Where's the 15 other entities that have publicly said they're committing what you would call genocide, right? Objectively calling for the death of children, saying there's nobody innocent, calling for Amalek. I mean, it's interesting. But it specifically highlights the 3 leaders that are being protected in Qatar. And it says of war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Gaza Strip in Israel. A panel of 3 judges will consider the prosecutor's evidence and determine whether to issue the arrest warrants and allow a case to proceed. The judges again, right there, though, you could argue just because they issue the warrants, it may not go anywhere. The judges typically take 2 months to make such decisions. And even right there, even if it does go the way we want to, that's 2 more months of ongoing genocide that they will not stop. And even on top of that, let's just say they knock out Gallant and Netanyahu. Everyone behind them is just as bad right now. It goes on to say, Israel is not a member of the court, which is something we remembered. We've talked about many times. So even if the arrest warrants are issued, Netanyahu and Gallant do not face any immediate risk of prosecution. So you'd think that they would argue that that's why they would just disregard it then, right? Well, no, they're coming out aggressively, attacking this, threatening them, which has already been done by Bolton and Pompeo and everybody else that is afraid of what this will show. But Khan's announcement deepens Israel's isolation as it presses ahead in Gaza, and the threat of arrest could make it difficult for the Israeli leaders to travel abroad. But what's interesting is because Palestine, as I'll show you from their own statement, which is probably going to bother Israel too, that they address it as the state of Palestine from the ICC, is part of the ICC. That's why this is even happening. That's why they're able to do this, because Palestine is claiming that this. So the point is, in a weird backward way, that now puts them at much more risk to being arrested within Gaza, because even though it's all Palestine, right? What's crazy is that they're going, well, we can't arrest them over there in Israel proper. What are you talking about? You get the point, but it's insulting to see it played that way. And this all could be a big show to end up going after just people in Gaza. I hope not. But it says Benny Gantz, a former military chief and member of the Israel's war cabinet with Netanyahu and Gallant, harshly criticized Khan's announcement, saying Israel fights with, guess what? One of the strictest moral codes. I mean, they're still really playing this game. I mean, I have a clip of RFK Jr. literally saying that they take more pains than anyone in the world to stop civilian killing. How can you even make that argument with a straight face? I mean, even Piers Morgan took a stand against this guy, making it look very clearly, highlighting that they did not care about civilian deaths. And he goes, respect. So we have strictest moral codes, respects international law, and has a robust judiciary capable of investigating itself. You know why they say that? Because that's supposed to be the argument. That's what the U.S. says about why we don't adhere to what you say. We respect what you do, but it doesn't apply when they can investigate themselves. How ridiculous is that? We're not talking about the idea of the United States or Israel being able to investigate crimes within a country. And even more so their own government. We're talking about the fact that they are the ones responsible for the crime. So even whether or not you have a robust judiciary, if you are in control of the judiciary, it doesn't make any difference. And that's what we're talking about. This is, I mean, even talking about the idea of gosh, I'm forgetting what the general term was. You know, the overhauls they were doing for the government of Israel, which is one of the reasons why Netanyahu was so they were protesting that before October 7th and even after. The reforms they were talking about, right? That's exactly the point. They were trying to change this in a way that made them less accountable. That's the whole point. And so when they say we can investigate ourselves, well, yeah, that's the whole issue. And it's the same thing with the US government and plenty of other Russia, China. It's the same thing. And I'm not even arguing, like, this is a sticky conversation because first and foremost, I do not believe from a general sense of nation state, we should be held accountable by some manipulated international entity. Because overall, though, the point is it exists today. That is where we are. And if they're stepping forward to call out these crimes, all I'm talking about is the acknowledgement of this. And I do want to see people that commit crimes go to jail. And if you're in a situation where there is no accountability where they are, well, this seems like the right direction. But it's a very slippery slope when you understand how manipulated the ICC is and the ICJ and the United Nations and how they can be weaponized. I've never argued I have all the answers. The people that just want to say that we can't allow them to do that, what's your solution then to stopping people like Netanyahu and Biden? Oh, you don't have one. Okay, so the point is that there is a situation where we are stuck between this. And I think that we could understand that in a situation where we are not occupied by foreign entities, then maybe we could have a situation where we don't need a foreign entity to, the point is that we're in a really bad way. We can clearly see that our government is not what we think it is. And the same goes for many other governments around the world. So we should have these conversations. We need to flesh these things out. The problem is that we can't. We start having this conversation, you get called un-American. You get called anti-Semite. Just stop that conversation from happening and to ensure that they maintain the status quo. Goes on to say, quote, the state of Israel is waging one of the just wars. Waging one of the most just wars fought in modern history following a reprehensible massacre perpetrated by terrorist Hamas October 7th. Just. One of the most just wars in history as you've killed more people per capita. I mean, you've broken every single metric, every single record, most journalists, most UN members, everything. But all they do is say Hamas, and it's supposed to make it all go away. Even though we know, as we'll get to now, that they have funded them to make sure that they were there so they could use them in this exact way. Now, first, let's watch this clip. Speaking with CNN, the ICC, Khan in particular, speaking about who he's going to, who the warrants are for. I find it interesting that they don't even mention Israel until the latter half of this clip.
We're here at the ICC. You are today announcing that you are applying for arrest warrants for top military and political leadership in the Israel-Gaza war since the October 7th events. First and foremost, explain to me exactly what you're asking for and who you are charging.
Today, Cristian, we've applied for warrants to the pretrial chamber of the International Criminal Court in relation to 3 individuals that are Hamas members.
Now, stop right there. I don't understand, unless this was selectively edited by CNN, which we should always ask. She didn't say who on one side. She said, who are you issuing warrants for? And he responds by saying, these 3 people from Hamas. No, about to say the rest. No, just that was it. So how is that your response? Wouldn't it be these people and these people? Like, I just found that strange. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I can't help but see the kind of slants like that. And I find it interesting. She has to chime in to make him to talk about Israel. Now, maybe that's just the way they cut it. That's certainly possible.
Sinwar, who's in charge on the ground.
That's Yahya Sinwar?
Absolutely. Dave, who's in charge of the Al-Qassam Brigade.
Not Dave like the subtitle show, but D-E-I-F, I believe it's spelled.
Brigade. And Hania, who's one of their political bureau based in Doha.
What are the charges?
The charges.
You see, so we're going to circle back. She didn't say, give me one side of it. She said, who are they? Find that interesting.
These are extermination, murder, taking of hostages, rape and sexual assault in detention.
Oh, really? Okay, so extermination, first of all, where are we talking about? If we're only talking about October 7th, which is the only thing that's really on the table right now, there's no justification for that. There was an armed resistance act that is legally protected, and yes, there were crimes committed. And we can now prove that at least, right now, based on what Zachary Foster, PhD, argued in regard to the people that were non-Jews that don't even get discussed in places like the Bedouin villages and elsewhere, I believe is what he said, that were involved in this, and well as the fact that we can prove 35 different ways that the IDF shot many of its own people, whether it was tanks or helicopters or direct IDF attacks. How do we pretend that this was an act of extermination? It was very clearly not in any sense of the word. The only way they make this make sense is to act like it was a targeted attack against Jews to wipe them off the map. Well, then explain all the other half of them that were not Jews at all that you guys don't talk about. Or the fact that you could prove that many of them, if not most, were killed by the IDF in response to them taking living hostages because they wanted to have an exchange. I mean, this doesn't add up when you just break down the basic realities. If it was about extermination, why did they take all these hostages? It's crazy. And then they killed them on the way back. Okay, that aside, which I'm sure is going to anger plenty of people to act like we're just, whitewashing this while they're ignoring 7 months of ongoing genocide of 50,000 plus people and 15,000 children. But that doesn't matter. Apparently, all of them matter is the point. Murder. Okay. Now that alone is, that's very valid. Not to say that we can prove that. I don't think we can differentiate right now between those that were killed by IDF and blamed on Hamas and those that were killed by Hamas that were there. But I'm no way would I argue that Hamas was not capable of killing people out of cold blood. That would be pretty ridiculous, especially since we know that Israel funds this group. So that one, very clear. Taking of hostages, absolutely proven. And it's the only one that I think was 100% easy to prove, that we could see that they took hostages that were children, not just hostages, because realize that this is taking IDF members, taking settlers that are armed and given official capacity, taking police, taking people that are legal targets under an armed resistance within an occupation, according to the Fourth Geneva Convention and international law, which I damn well know he knows that. But then he says, and this is what makes me very worried about how clearly dishonest this is going to be, sexual assault, not just rape and sexual assault, specifically in detention. So now we're pretending that you guys somehow know and have enough evidence for the argument that while they were there, they were being assaulted and sexually abused, despite the 14 different people that explicitly say the opposite. All that is based on, as far as I can tell, is that one woman who spoke to the paper and said that's what happened, which I don't think we can deny that. I don't know. She's claiming she was, groped and whatever she said happened, which is horrible. And that should not be disregarded. We should not pretend that doesn't matter. Rape was not used in that conversation, not once in the article. It would not be hard to wrap your mind around a random person on any war in any side being alone in a room with a gun and having control and taking advantage of the situation. There's 1,000 examples in any war you look at from the U.S. government and U.S. military. Same, rife with examples coming from Israel and the things they do just in not wartime. My point, though, is that something that we absolutely could argue would be possible. But to argue that that's worthy of an ICC investigation to the level of extermination or murder that you're claiming there was rape and sexual assault and detention, while you can prove for the last 50 years it's been happening in Israeli prisons that nobody cares about, that Human Rights Watch and Amnesty and every other group like B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights group, have called out, that the UN has called out. So this kind of thing that makes you frustrated. And the idea that then, are we to pretend that we're just going to disregard the clearly false claims they've been pushing about what happened on October 7th? He doesn't even mention that. He says rape and sexual assault in detention, which explicitly implies not on October 7th. Work that one out. So the point is that clearly we know they've been lying about what happened on October 7th in 1,000 different ways, and all you're doing is shifting it over to one example of what they claim happened in detention, despite many other examples of them proving that's not what happened based on their own testimony. I find that to be pretty hard to disregard.
So these are the key crimes that are alleged to have been committed by these 3 individuals.
But by the 3 individuals. That's also interesting. I didn't catch that before. So the ones that were in Qatar, are we pretending they were directing them via phone to tell them to sexually abuse people in these rooms? I mean, that seems very flimsy to me. I would love to see the evidence they're talking about.
The world was shocked on the 7th of October when people were ripped from their bedrooms, from their homes, from the different kibbutzim in Israel. And people have suffered enormously. And we have a variety of evidence to support the applications that we've submitted to the judges.
You have also issued warrants against the top political and military leadership of the government of the State of Israel.
We've applied for warrants. Of course, the judges must determine whether or not to issue them, but we've applied today, we'll apply for warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and also Minister of Defense Gallant for the crimes of causing extermination.
It's funny that, in my opinion, he didn't want to say it, because that's going to call cries of Holocaust denialism. What you can't accuse Jews of it. That's what it's going to come back to. Even though no one here is talking about Jews, we're talking about the crimes of Israel's government and the crimes of a Hamas political group.
Causing starvation as a method of war, including the denial of humanitarian relief supplies.
So again, he's claiming on the record that they provably, based on the evidence they have been denying food. The exact opposite of what Elon Levy screams online every day. The lies we keep getting told. That they have more food than they've ever had before. Lie, 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 lie.
Deliberately targeting civilians in conflict.
Right. It's a big deal. I mean, those are things that are provable, that has been denied right up to this very moment. Right? So it's a mixed bag, isn't it? Either way, if Hamas committed the crimes and they can prove it, then they should be held accountable. If Israel committed the crimes and they can prove it, they should be held accountable. That's the reality. Despite all of the lenses that get put over this to act like we're all, looking only at one side, the reality is that evidence matters, not just narrative spun by the group that you like better, which is what most of these supporters are doing. Now, what we need to recognize is that it's not hard to understand. There's an important overlap about Qatar and Israel. And what we're talking about is in regard to, first and foremost, the funding, which is arming, of the Hamas entity that was not about humanitarian aid. You're dumping billions of dollars in suitcases into a group's hands in a place where they have to get aid shipped in. So the argument they somehow gave them this money to buy aid from where? The local store? You're shipping it in because it's not there. That's the whole point. So this is such a flimsy argument. The point, though, is that we funded them, made sure they were in power so that they could pretend they were the reason that they didn't want the two-state solution, even though they're the ones that made them there. So you can't deny all of that. They've not even a single group in a main conversation from CNN, Fox News, that nobody's even dared to mention this, despite it being a provable reality. And I'll show you yet again the clips. But so as they're talking about the three leaders, are they the ones that are truly leading Hamas right now? Or are they the ones that are still protected in Qatar because they're the ones that are completely in bed with the Israeli government? That's my opinion. I think a lot of evidence backs that up. But I think what we're seeing is a shift over the years into what has become the people that have been attacked, lost their family, been called terrorists, that have grown up and become a part of the group that they want to change, they want to use to resist. What else? There's nowhere else they can go. And over the years, that has fundamentally changed the dynamic. I mean, this is why I think we see from 16, the charter changes, and they make it clear they're going after Zionism. I think something shifted. It doesn't mean there's not still people within it that are potentially influenced by Israel or that are capable of committing crimes. None of that's what I'm saying. But what's important to see is that this is something we can prove. This is from November. I've made this point many times. This is from 2023. Will Mossad be allowed to assassinate Hamas leaders in Qatar? It says Israeli sources state that the promise of Qatar as a haven may be true, but that doesn't mean they're free. So this is a very desperate, I think, effort to try to make it. So first of all, yes, the promise that I showed you in the beginning of this, like the first week after October 7th, that Netanyahu made it clear, I'm not going to go after the people in Qatar. He said that publicly. A promise that Qatar was a haven for the leaders of the group that you claim you want to exterminate? Just like every other narrative, that doesn't make sense unless you acknowledge that they're working with these groups. The point, though, is that this is where Sinwar is. This is where he's basically on the record. Oh, that's right. The other link I had. Anyway, the picture I brought up earlier. Israel has failed to track down Sinwar, one of the people they're claiming they're investigating, and its military chief, Daif, two of the ones they mentioned, likely, and it says, despite taking all parts of Gaza, where they likely resided until recently. Where are they? In Qatar. That's what they're talking about in this article, that they have fled to Qatar. Okay. The point is that this is known to them, and that's why they're saying, well, the promise that we're Qatar is a safe haven. They live in shocking wealth in Qatar, as they point to them when they want them to say the narratives that they want them to say. This is what we keep. There's like one main channel, MER, whatever that channel is, that every time they need it, they go, look at what they're saying. We want to kill all the children, or we want to hate all the Jews, whatever they keep saying. And they go, that's what they all think. And that's literally not what's being said over in Gaza. How do we not piece that together? There's clearly an issue there. Now, it could just be that there's a deviation between them, but I think it's more obvious as we get into the evidence that this is a group that is influenced still, and they're maintaining their control over these leaders so they can always continue to maintain the illusion of what Hamas was or what they wanted it to be. Here is another example. Here is the other one. This is the other one they referenced, Ismail Hanya. He has been based in Qatar since 2017, where he maintains a luxurious lifestyle. So again, you're going to protect that. You're going to allow that to be a safe haven for the group that you... I mean, how does it even make sense? This is like pretending that the U.S. is allowing Osama bin Laden or the ISIS leadership or all whatever the groups they otherwise have created and we've talked about plenty of times, and allowed them to live in sanctuary in Turkey. Or even more so, like Britain. They live in some fancy offices, and every occasionally we point to them, but we can't get them. It's insulting to your intelligence. Oh, that's where that went. Here is France 24 highlighting Taif. Same point. Perspective of Gaza residents. So even in Gaza, and this is my point, they accuse him of leading Hamas from a luxury hotel in Qatar. So you can see that there are people on the ground who don't see this person as somebody worthy of respect, as somebody that's living in luxury that I argue is supported by Israel. And I think that's become a common understanding. Oh, is it the same? Oh, no, it's a different one. Oh, it's the same point. So the point is each one of these are highlighting all of the leadership and how they are sitting in their sleek offices in Qatar. I mean, this is from October 14th. It's after October 7th. Clearly, they're not there. Based on Israeli media, based on Australian media, based on U.S. media, based on French media, everything. So let's go back to the point. If you're pretending that they're sanctioned by they're going to get investigated by the ICC, does that mean that you're going after the group that you can prove are guilty because Israel's going to make that happen? Or, which is probably where that seems to be going, or hopefully, which I don't think is the case, unfortunately, is this the ICC making a correct assessment and saying, well, they did commit crimes? And these three leaders were involved with the worst part of October 7th. But guess what? We break down the investigation that they're actually put to the test or put to the task by Israel. Something to consider. Hopeful, but I don't think it'll happen. Now, don't forget, by the way, for those that haven't seen it, Hamas, the group we're talking about, these very people that they're screeching about being the worst thing alive, was funded by Israel. If that doesn't matter to you, then you're not an honest person.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told, on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas.
So what we did, with the permission of our Prime Minister, is to let Qatar to transfer a huge amount of money in cash, probably more than $1.4 billion. By doing it, we increased the power of Hamas. We did everything in order to make sure that Hamas will go on controlling Gaza, and Palestinian Authority will control the West Bank, so they will fight each other.
Netanyahu maintains the Qatar money was to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe. Having helped to build up Hamas, Netanyahu has now vowed to destroy it.
He fed the beast, and it
the point is that the argument being it was somehow about humanitarian aid, and I made the point. It's ridiculous. And so again, this is not just his rival, Barak, right? Hussein Barak. No, this is also that was the the leader of the former head of Shin Bet, like the FBI. I mean, these are not random anomalies, guys. These are leading people involved with all of this that are telling you that that's the reality. And here's a statement from Haaretz, quoted from 2019 in his Likud party. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy. And in fact, there's another statement to that. Yeah, of course, I forgot about that. Since I opened it, I'll grab it real quick. Where there's a follow-up that goes on to make it even more clear in that article, which is quoted from Haaretz. It says, yeah, so very clearly it says, so anyone who wants to thwart it, says it right there, has to support funding them, which is, that's arming them, guys. You're giving them money in order to seek out whatever they want. What do you think they're going to grab? It says, quote, this is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. That's as simple as it gets. Divide and conquer. You're funding the terrorist group that you want to be a terrorist group so you could point at it and say terrorist group. That's why we can't support them. It doesn't get any more simple than that. Then, this one's very clear as well. This is from 2020. Mossad chief visited Qatar, the protected place where they keep those people, to continue Hamas financial aid. Financial aid. Israel visited by Avigdor Lieberman, who says Mossad chief and Israeli military commander were sent to the mission by Netanyahu. It takes a special kind of willful ignorance to avoid what you're seeing here. Now, well, you can listen to this for yourself. This is just Khan's 9-minute breakdown of what they're doing. What I'll show you is basically just what they showed here. This is the statement of the ICC prosecutor. Applications for arrest warrants in the situation in the state of Palestine. That's a win in and of itself right there, quite frankly. But here's what it says. On the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe, and he goes on to list the 3 Hamas leaders, the ones comfortably held in Qatar by Israel's government, in my opinion. Extermination, and this is what he's, saying they're guilty of. Extermination is a crime against humanity. I really would like to see where they're arguing that. If it's just October 7th, I don't know how you think that makes sense. Murder as a crime against humanity, contrary to article, as a war crime. Taking hostages as a war crime. Now, that one you could argue in certain examples, but if they're just going to say every hostage they took, that's not the case. Many of them were military members. And I know they know that the reality of international law is in armed resistance, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about POWs. As much as that won't make people happy. Many of even the women that they highlight, the one being taken on the back of a motorcycle, she was literally a member of the IDF. So it's just about trying to manipulate the average person. Now it says rape and other sexual violence as crimes against humanity. Again, there's zero proof to that. They just keep saying the arguments, and it's not only is there no proof, they've been caught more time let's put it this way. The vast majority of times they've spoken about this, they've later been shown to be what they said to be provably false, caught in a huge lie. And I'll play one in a second from Biden, yet again, coming out like the 40 beheaded babies and claiming he saw something that we can prove doesn't exist. Torture. I'd like to see what they're referencing. Where's the torture we're talking about? It wouldn't surprise me. I have no way would argue that they're not capable of that. But at the same time, we can see torture taking place in Gaza or in the prisons where they held children in Israel. Other inhumane acts, crimes against humanity, I don't even know what that means, cruel treatment, and outrages upon personal dignity. Sure. Then down here, they go off about Netanyahu and Gallant. That's it. 3 on that side, 2 on this side, and they simply go over starvation, willfully causing great suffering, willful killing, intentional direct acts of civilian population, extermination and or murder contrary to these articles, persecution is a crime against humanity, other inhumane acts. Not genocide, but all these things they're committing, which they're angry about. So Israel is lashing out against the group. And so apparently is groups and parts of the Hamas organization. Which I think is interesting because they're getting it from both sides, right? Because, and honestly, that's what happens when you try to hit it right down the middle. Instead of just being objective and highlighting what you can see. But here's what the chairman of the Euromed Human Rights Group had to say. The arrest warrants at the ICC intends to issue against the Israel occupation leaders are a small step in the road, but they were written with a colonial mindset, employing double standards and by corrupt, biased hands that lack true justice. Sadly, I agree with that. I'm hopeful it'll go the right direction, but you can already see, like I already pointed out, ways this is more about placation, creating the illusion of accountability while maintaining the same thing we're all trying to stop. That's the real point. Pardon me, I had to clear my throat, trying to do it off the microphone. Alon Mizrahi points out something interesting here as well. He says, and this is the point about historically highlighting what Khan has been incapable, it seems, of doing. He goes, so Sleeping Beauty, Karim Khan, has woken up from his decades-long slumber. Now, isn't that just outstanding? He goes, and this, it's not like it should matter in many of these contexts, but he is an Israeli Jew. And he says, as we have been fed tons of misinformation, propaganda, and psychological warfare in this genocide, here are some things to note. A, This happens the day after the Iranian president's helicopter crash. It could be a coincidence, as are all things in the world of international politics. It could be powers that be that had enough of Netanyahu and see this as a red line crossed, or it could be something else entirely, a coordinated effort to divert our attention and give us the false hope that something is about to be done at the service of future escalation and more atrocities. We don't know, but experience says we need to be skeptical. That's the most logical thing you can say right now. B, we have no idea how long this is going to take. And real quickly back to that, like this is what you'll get from the people calling us conspiracy theorists or secret Jew haters. Blindly taking at face value exactly what the U.S. and Israel are saying is happening, despite their record of lying over and over about what's going on. Now, I'm not dismissing what they're saying. We're questioning everything of all sides. That's the same thing we said about the Hamas allegation about the recent bombing of that location. What did I say? We should not blindly take at face value anything either side is saying. We should consider all possibilities, question all of them. But of course, that doesn't sound right when you're saying he secretly hates Jews. So you have to make it into I blindly trust one side and ignore the other, because that's what they do in reverse. Every accusation is an admission, right? But it goes on to say, as a reluctance, we also, he says, don't know what happened in the meantime. Sorry, restart the statement. He goes, we have no idea how long this will take. And that's the point about allowing the genocide to continue under the at least possibility of accountability, which worries me, obviously. Excuse me. And it says, we also don't know what will happen in the meantime. As a reluctant conspiracy theorist, I will not rule out that this was done on purpose to bolster claims of anti-Semitism and allow American lawmakers to reassert their dedication to Zionism, up to and including going to war with Iran, the source of all evil, yada, yada, yada. What he's saying is essentially creating, like we talk about, what Zionism is desperate to create the illusion of to justify its presence, pointing at the ICC and going, see, we told you. Everybody hates the Jews, even though we're not talking about the Jews. We're talking about Zionism and the crimes of a government. But to them, it's synonymous. Even their laws they're passing now, because that's the only way they can maintain control of this. C, the timing of this is very unusual, not only in relation to the president of Iran, but also as regards to genocide. This looks impressive, but does nothing to stop the action. Because even if they accuse them and it comes to pass, there's no actual mechanism to stop them. He says, could this be a way of buying time for Israel to complete the destruction of Gaza while we're promised justice that in reality will never be allowed to be seen? He says, I trust no words, only actions, which is kind of where we all should be. And one thing is clear to me. He says, this is going to send the American political system into a spiral of violent, racist, hegemonic inanity. I don't know if you meant inanity, like inane or insanity. Either way, the point is that I see it coming too. It's already happening. People like Stefanik and Tom Cotton and recruits are all going to scream that I stand with Israel and this is racist and anti-Semitic and this is coming from the hatred. That's where it's all going to be. It's already happening. Despite all the evidence we have that's undeniable. He says those who initiated this step must know this. So my best guess, he says, is Russia, China, which would make sense. Destabilization, trying to spin these governments, spin them into, basically trying to, look, this is the same point I make all the time. What they're highlighting is something we should care about, if that's what's happening, right? We should care that our government is blindly in the interest of a foreign entity at your expense. But on the same time, it benefits Russia and China to create that problem, to show the American people that their government's not in their interest. Now, is that in our interest? In their mind? Or maybe not. Maybe in their minds about creating the divide to then circumvent that, step in and cause even more destabilization. We should be concerned about that. Like there's an element of that coming from the two-party paradigm that is, we should worry about them exacerbating the divide for their benefit that will only make our situation worse. But that does not mean you should ignore what they're pointing to. That's both sides playing you. We should acknowledge that they're highlighting, if this is them doing this, the reality that your government is not fighting for you. And then also be on guard to other foreign entities trying to take advantage of that. I know, logic, it sounds so crazy today, right? But it says, as I said yesterday, he writes about the Iranian president's death. This is the buildup to the big clash between global South and West. Finally, he says, Hamas has made the prime minister over Israel an international criminal. And this is a historic and strategic achievement. It really is. Israel's isolation is reaching meaningful, tangible landmarks. This is the point. You just can't come back from what they've done. Now, Ali Abunimah from Electronic Intifada highlights what they said. You can read it for yourself. This is their link. Simply saying, quote, Hamas stands ready to appear before the ICC, which I find fascinating. The idea that this is in the minds of people seeing them for what they call them, this would be the equivalent of ISIS going, we stand ready to present ourselves in front of the ICC. Like, does that sound like it makes sense to anybody? I mean, the reality being is that they would get arrested on the spot, most likely. But maybe they'll try to do that here. Probably wouldn't surprise me. But what I think is interesting is they've said this before. They're willing to go to the United Nations. They just don't want that to happen. Just like you see in previous examples in the past where Iran, like, remember the limpet mines and John Bolton and all that spun up in it when at the time it was Jareed Zarif. He went to the UN. He was there ready to present the evidence to prove they were lying, and they wouldn't even let him in. That's how that works. While screaming about how bad he is in the UN. These are criminals. So the point is that they stand ready to appear before the ICC. Now, they could be lying too, but it says with witnesses and live testimony and bear the burden of any judicial finding against it or its members after a full and fair trial with rules of evidence. So he's basically saying that if we get ruled against us, we'll stand by that. We'll be held accountable. I mean, even if they're lying, when's the last time you heard the U.S. or Israel ever say something like that? I found that to be pretty powerful. And it's not to say support Hamas or anything like that. It's just simply acknowledging that what they said is interesting, and it could just be a very well-played dynamic, like I highlight with Russia and anybody else, seemingly just playing the good guy in contrast to what the U.S. is clearly doing. Doesn't mean that they are the good guy. I mean, who knows? It could be. I don't think in those terms. I think all governments are problematic, but my point is that playing that role right now is obviously advantageous for them. So we always have to consider that. It's like politicians and media right now suddenly calling out Israel. Do they really care? I don't think so, but they see the opportunity. Now, Ali also points out, in regard to what Khan said here, the charges of rape against Hamas leaders are baseless and shows that Khan is engaging in cynical politics to try to soften the blow. Exactly. That's the lightest way you could see this, in my opinion, to soften the blow of the real and serious charges against Israel's genocidal leaders. So basically saying that he's just trying to, like I said, that's what I meant when I said kind of playing it even. Well, one for them, one for them. Now, I think it's worse than that. What he's saying would mean that ultimately they will ultimately hold him accountable, and this is just a way to kind of soften that blow. I hope he's right. Frankly, I kind of feel like that's not going to be the case. I kind of end up seeing this as the illusion of accountability. I know I'm a cynic when it comes to this stuff, but I hope I'm wrong. Now, here's what Israel Katz had to say. And this is where we get into the responses to all this. And can you guess where it goes? Can you guess? I'm sure you could I'll give you 3 guesses. You're only going to need 1. It says the outrageous decision by the prosecutor of the ICC in The Hague is an unrestrained frontal assault on the victims of October 7th and our 128 hostages in Gaza. I don't see why you're going after the people that they claim did that. Is it only because they're also holding you accountable? Like, I don't even know how you could make that statement. How is it a unrestrained frontal assault on the victims if they're going after the people that you think are responsible? You see my point? Like, it's obviously the only thing you can say because they're also accusing you of the crimes you're committing. But he goes on to say, while Hamas murderers and rapists, which clearly the rape allegation is the best they can do right now because they're trying to use atrocity propaganda, even though they're failing. But they say commit crimes against humanity, against our brothers and sisters. The prosecutor mentions in the same breath the prime minister, basically Gallant and Netanyahu, alongside Nazi-like monsters. There's your first example. Who didn't see that coming? A historical disgrace that will be remembered forever, which quite frankly, I kind of feel is a threat. I feel like they've heard that used many times recently. That like it suggests that, that's not going to stand. In any case, Nazi-like, I just think that's such a ridiculous overlap. A group that is in no way, shape, or form, whether it's ideological, whether it's visibly, whether it's anything, is even remotely like the Nazi era timeframe, aside from in contrast to the Zionist connection on record to the actual Nazi party, or the idea of Zionism itself and overlap with lots of authoritarianism, or the attack of Jews themselves to justify their own existence, which plenty of people like Avi Shalom and other experts talk about. No, those are all racist comments, even though we can prove them all, right? The point is that Nazi-like is a way to create the illusion that this is the only bad guy in the conversation, and to compare the people committing genocide because of who these people are in Gaza to the other bad Nazis, to try to make it sound like only one side is a problem here. Like, think about how insulting that is. Even if you think that Hamas is the worst thing in the world, you are committing genocide. The world sees it. You're not putting that away. It says, I have instructed the immediate establishment of a special command center. Here we go. At the foreign ministry, with all professional entities aimed at fighting against the decision intended primarily to shackle Israel's hands and prevent it from exercising its right to self-defense now that we're 7 months away from that. I made this argument when we first started this in the first week. How long will this still be self-defense? If this goes on for 4 years, are you going to still be arguing it's self-defense? I promise you they would. It's insulting. And what you're saying is shackle your hands. So all you're really saying is they're trying to stop us from finishing the job. It goes, I intend to speak with foreign ministers of leading countries around the world to urge them, I would read, threaten, insinuate, to use our control mechanisms to force them to do what we want, to oppose the prosecutor's decision and declare that even if warrants are issued, they do not intend to enforce them. That's being scared. And they've already admitted that. There are sources that spoke with Haaretz in Times of Israel admitting that inside their own circle that Netanyahu and the rest were, quote, fearful of how this would go out. Because if they then want to fly to the United States, where they desperately need to continue to propagandize everybody, they can get arrested. And it wouldn't even have to be because of the U.S. And any other entity could do so. That scares them. That's what he's saying. They're trying to get their oaths that they will not arrest them, even though there's an international warrant for them. It says, no power in the world will prevent us from bringing back all our hostages. Of course, because that's what you're doing, despite that the bombing actions you're taking are killing them. It's just so insulting. Nobody believes that. Not even Israelis believe that anymore. I was going to do that again today, but I won't. I'm almost where we're at in time. Yeah, it's a good call. It's almost 2.5 hours. I will go over it again. It's the same points we make, but there's new information around it. That right now in Israel, they just had a massive, to me, it looks like 100,000 people, if not way more than that, which is the picture I could see, marching, calling for them to take the deal that Hamas is offering. You're not going to hear that in the United States because they'll desperately hide it from you. How do you make sense of that? Again, I do not believe most of those people care about the people in Gaza, but they do care about their families, and the other people around them are beginning to recognize that Israel doesn't either. And so they're going, bring them home, take the deal, and then go back to it. But they're not, because I don't believe they want them back. I think they have been killing them systematically from the very beginning. And we'll go over the Shawnee Luke story again when we go over it next, where the story's already changed for the 4th time. Remember when they said they found a bone and she was decapitated? That was all from the president of Israel. That changed 3 or 4 times. Now, apparently, they found her body. It's completely intact. At least that's the story. I mean, I hope the family got her body back. But remember how that actually went. She was taken to a hospital. That was confirmed by Newsweek and her family. That kind of destroys the whole narrative of what they claimed happened. Then that hospital where she was bombed and destroyed, and she was likely killed there. I don't know how we ignore that because I proved that on the show, but whatever. Here is what Lapid said. Yeah, you're Lapid. The ICC arrest warrants are a complete moral failure. So arrest warrants for people committing crimes are a moral failure if it's about Israel. Got it. It says we cannot accept the outrageous comparison between Netanyahu and Sinwar, between the leaders of Israel and the leaders of Hamas. The group that you're funding and put in position is unjustified, right? Or the fact that Netanyahu has committed far, far, far more crimes than Sinwar, verifiably. Even if everything they've ever said about Hamas is true, that's still the case. That's going to bother people, but it's a fact. And on top of that, just since October 7th, you can prove that. Yeah. Well, what Ben used to say before he went crazy or exposed that he was always crazy? Facts don't care about your feelings. He doesn't think that anymore, apparently. Elizabeth Hagdorn points out something interesting. And this is Blinken's response to the U.S. government. He says the U.S. fundamentally rejects the ICC prosecutor's request for Netanyahu and Gallant arrest warrants. Quote, we reject the prosecutor's equivalence of Israel with Hamas. That's what they keep highlighting. You know why? Because they don't want to be on record claiming that they're not committing crimes, I think. I think they're so worried about where this ultimately goes that they're taking they're consulting counsel before they respond. All you're saying is, we don't like that you compared them to the bad guys. It's not really a real response. Now, here's where you get into the ones you'd expect more than anything. This was the one guess you didn't need. There is a vile global campaign, Elon Levy says, the unemployed ex-liar on Twitter, who's still a liar on Twitter, but just does it on his own accord. He says, to cast the Jewish state, no one's talking about that, as the new Nazi Germany. Well, no one said that either, actually. weird that you're projecting so much, right? And where does anybody, the only one that mentioned Nazis is when you guys talk about the other side. So what's it, or rather people protesting who all make those arguments because it's a verifiable historical connection that you guys don't want to talk about, which by the way is an easily, you can look it up on Wikipedia. Grab that for you. And this one too. The two that I tend to show you just because it's easy to verify. Take you 2 seconds. This show we did, Zionism versus Nazism, and all the source material you can look for yourself. And it's not some random blog. We're talking about historical documents from the CIA, from Mossad themselves, from the Israeli government, from Haaretz, from Times of Israel, like undeniable realities. Human rights groups, or the fact that Dan Cohen highlights, according to Israel's Haaretz, that they continue to ally with Nazi Germany even after the final solution. Work that out in your mind and make sense of the story they were told about how the creation of Israel was to fight the thing that we're pointing to, even though they were working with Nazi Germany while that was going on. It's easy to, guys, this is provable documented history. So the point is you're calling them, you're claiming people that are accusing you of genocide or framing you as the new Nazi Germany. Like, this is why I point out how bad they are at this. Like, I don't think they recognize how bad, like this, you're exposing, this is the projection. This is like the accusing them of that which you are guilty kind of game. No one made that point, man. Not in this conversation, not the ICC, but you made it clear. As a means of pursuing its ultimate destruction. So you jump in the show. So bluntly, you're calling them Nazis and you're saying that it's only about destroying the Jewish state. No one's trying to do that in this conversation. They're trying to hold two people in your government accountable. And you turn that into calling us Nazis and destroying all of Jewish. I mean, it's laughably stupid. He says, today, the ICC prosecutor decided to lend its hand to this effort, which only serves those who want to finish the Nazis' job. So again, all the way back to the idea that we're now pretending that anybody doing any of this is just hating Jewish people and trying to destroy them like the Nazis did. The only thing they got. In reality, we're talking about an international body who has a mountain of evidence, who is even going after the other side as well, and is claiming two of them are guilty of crimes. But to him, that's Nazis destroying everything and all the Jewish people. They're ridiculous. These are clowns today. And I think most people recognize that. And of course, Zane points out, I wonder how they came to that conclusion. Remember this? Glant, we are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. All these are verifiable, easy to look up. And this is Ben Gvir. The only thing that should enter Gaza as long as Hamas doesn't release the hostages is not a gram of humanitarian aid. Yeah, crime. No matter what you think about Hamas, that's a crime. All of these are crimes. Here is, what was he again? Major General Alan. Human shields must be treated as such. You wanted hell, you're going to get hell. Human shields, human animals, he said. And he's talking about Palestinians. On and on and on. Here is Hagari. The emphasis is on damage, not accuracy. That was a clumsy statement right in the beginning that proved that they were not trying to be accurate, but they think we're that stupid. We're just going to not remember that you said that? Lapid, and I've shown you that one many times. If international media is objective and shows both sides, it serves Hamas. So if we show all the sides, including what you're doing, it's in the interest of Hamas. That's what he said. Ben Ari said, the children of Gaza have brought this upon themselves. That's real statements, guys. These are genocidal, maniacal statements. Netanyahu will turn Gaza into a desert island. Herzog, it is not true, this rhetoric about civilians not being aware, not involved. It's absolutely not true. It's just grotesque. I am very puzzled, the last one says. Concerned with the word is showing for the Palestinian people, the world. I'm very puzzled with the constant concern the world is showing Palestinian people and is actually showing for these horrible, inhuman animals. He's not talking about Hamas. He's showing you what they really think. Unreal. Now, let me add these for you so you don't lose them. Make sure you watch this. It's an important show, I think. And Dan Cohen's been doing some great work on this as well. Here's Caroline Glick, making it just as clumsily obvious as possible. The ICC apparently is now a neo-Nazi institution. Neo-Nazi institution. So because Elon claims he's accusing you of being Nazis, your jump is to say they're now Nazis? It's just childishly stupid. I mean, what's just say that they're say that they're liars. This clumsy use of anti-Semitic and Nazi against anybody they don't like is sad. It's really sad. And that's where this comes into play. I put that, pretty shoddily, actually, but I made that not too long ago just because it's exactly what's happening. Remember the classic for the podcast, The Golden Book? Everyone I Don't Like is Hamas, a child's guide to online political discussion. That's what we're dealing with. A neo-Nazi institution. Now, on top of that, the crazy part about this is to say that they're like, the argument simply being that they hate Jewish people, they're neo-Nazis because they are going after the criminals. Now, but not just one-sided, but anytime you're going after the Israeli government, even if you're also going after Hamas. So how is it a neo-Nazi institution if they're going after both of them? Think about it for a second. Or how is it only hating Jews if you're going after Hamas as well? Is that a ploy? Are you lying about that? It's just so clumsy. It says both the fake court and its genocide-enabling employees, now everyone there works there too, should be treated accordingly by all people of good faith. What does that mean? Accordingly? Genocide-enabling employees should be treated accordingly? Are you saying they should be committing genocide against them and their families? She says they should be denied visas. Their assets should be frozen. Wow. And they should be prosecuted for providing material aid to Nazis. Oh, God, these people are so dangerously irresponsible. It's just desperation, guys. These are people that have, this is the senior contributing editor at the Jewish News Syndicate. They have been doing so much complicit actions for genocide. I think these people are genuinely trying to, they see it. They know they've lost control. This is screeching about Nazis and anti-Semitism in a case where you're literally calling out the employees of people who work there and saying we should freeze their assets, prosecute them for material aid to Nazis. You mean like Zionism work? I mean, it's just so crazy to me. It falls on deaf ears, guys, because it's baseless is the best way to put it. So where's the evidence they're neo-Nazis now? Are you just simply calling anyone a Nazi that doesn't say the thing you think is what's going on? David Collier, same old, same old. Not for the first time in history, a court based in Europe is trying to issue warrants for the arrest of Jews based on false trumped-up charges. Okay, so now it's only about the Jewish people? I thought it was about Zionism and the acts of the government they're committing against people in Palestine. Oh, I forget it's only about Jewish people because that's all you seem to point out. According to the ICC, the Jews, not Israel or those two people, had to lie back and let Hamas slaughter and rape them. Nobody said that. And again, are you ignoring the other half of the conversation that weren't Jews? Yes. It's just insulting to anybody out there that can't see, who recognizes only people that they are pointing to on October 7th are the Jews that were attacked. There were a lot of other people that weren't Jewish. I guess they don't care about those ones. I simply said, as always, only racists and Zionists are making this about Judaism. This is about the verifiable crimes of the government you lie for every day. Your desperation is self-evident. Elon Levy again. It has been the dream of every anti-Semite since the Nuremberg trials to put Jews back on the dock for the Nazis' crimes. That's not a dream you want to appear in. It literally gives me the sheebie-jeebies. It's just gross. These people are absolutely despicable. So you're talking about an international body who is investigating crimes, whether or not you think they're honest, and is accusing people in the government of crimes. And your go-to is the dream of every anti-Semite is to charge all Jews with the Nazis' crimes all that time ago. What does it have to do with anything we're talking about? The only thing people can connect it to is that they must be Jew haters because they're going after Israel. That's it. It's not, where's the evidence? Like, all you guys are screaming about the evidence and the provable action, and yet you keep making allegations from the state, like from behind the podium of Israel, that have nothing to back it up. That's why people see through it. Asaf MD highlights, I don't understand. Did Gallant say we are imposing a complete siege on Gaza? No electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly? Yes or no? That'll clear things up quickly. Of course, you won't answer that. Now, this is in a recent discussion, and this comes off the same point about how Biden himself has started to parrot things that we've seen before. Like, there's no place in the world that Jews are safe without Israel. And Sam Husseini, being one of the only brave people in the room, save for a few others, who asked the right questions. Right? So we're coming off the idea, the lie about one side being something. I mean, the bottom line being that they're trying to hide accountability. Not even just the exercise. And let's just say it doesn't come to pass where they go to jail. Just the exercise of putting this out there, they know because they've already lost, is only going to make this much more likely that they will go to jail in other circumstances. So what Sam Husseini is highlighting is that the U.S. government is absolutely, irrevocably at this point, on the wrong side of history. And he's talking about the fact that Biden is saying things that are directly undermining the reality of our constitutional rights and what we pretend this country is. Doesn't that bother Republicans or Democrats, people that care? That, of course it should. And I think most people are seeing this now. So what I wrote is the Patel's response to this was pathetic, very revealing. He was mumbling and stuttering, and you can tell that he was caught off guard. In his, as I said, just typically cowardly fashion, is ignoring the obvious point, and he knows it. There are U.S. government representatives, and they are clearly Israel first. Like Brian Mast, for example, who actively makes that clear every single day, only caring about Israeli Americans, for example, despite the fact that there's still over 600 American Palestinians who are in Gaza, but he never seems to care about them.
Has recently said, and he said many times in the last year or so, quote, "Were there no Israel, there wouldn't be a Jew in the world that is safe." Isn't that both false and antithetical to the First Amendment? Jews, Muslims, Christians, atheists, whoever are safe in the United States because of the First Amendment, because of the nature of U.S. society. How can...
Now, whether you agree with that or not is not the point. The point is to put that on them, and that's what they would argue, right? And the idea being that that puts them in a position to either say, well, yes, clearly it's safe for Jews in this country, which if they say no, that's pretty crazy, right? Because it's not the case. It's obviously safe for as much as it's safe for anybody else, it is safe for Jews in this country. Here's our response.
And this administration stand behind a remark like that, particularly about a foreign power that itself stands accused of not only genocide, but being an apartheid regime.
Right.
Isn't that statement, were there no Israel, there wouldn't be a Jew in the world that is safe, antithetical to the First Amendment and false?
I'm not sure which these comments from the president you're referring to, but
What? You mean the one he just read for you? So you need to know the location and the time it was said for you to understand what he's saying? Like, obviously he knows this was said. It's a very public clear statement that people have been saying repeatedly. That's the best you got. I don't know which one you're talking about. The one I just effing said, man. It's just pathetic. They've lost their ability to do it. You know what it is? Even the ones that are good at this are in such a detrimental position. There's just no way you can respond to these things because they know they've lost. They know the world sees right through it. And even worse, they know the world now sees them. That the U.S. government is not doing what it pretends to do. You don't have this moral high ground anymore. Thank God. And it's not about destroying the U.S., the American country. It's about highlighting that your government is doing that. And we're trying to save it. But he drowns in this response.
Have no issue or which these comments from the president you're referring to, but I have no issue or reason with the way that those with what the president said, and I think.
My God, that was bad. I have no reason with with what he said. He's saying that he doesn't mind it. He's okay with it. He agrees with it. However you want to take that.
I think what we are talking about historically, since the founding of the state of Israel as a Jewish state, is I'm sure what the president was referring to. Of course.
What does that mean? No, he wasn't. He's saying that nowhere in the world is safe for a Jew other than Israel. That's patently false. He's lying right there. He's not saying that. And the point on top of that is what you're discussing is ignoring the entire history around that. But of course, he's not going to get into that.
We have freedoms within our own country under the First Amendment, but I don't have anything else to offer on that.
Yeah, that was terrible. So yeah, they're right, but then we have freedom. So everybody, who's next? That's really sad.
Well, I mean, he said this several times. It wasn't a one-off. He said it when he met Netanyahu at the UN, I think last July or August. And he said it since then. I think he said it once he arrived in Israel. But it says in the world.
Right.
Jews are safe in the United States and have been safe in the United States way before Israel existed. Isn't that correct?
That is true, but we were also...
Oops. So right there, you just contradicted what you said a second ago. If they're not safe, if what they said you have no problem with, and that's the case, and yeah, but we have rights over here, you can't then go, yes, so they have been safe there. That contradict, I mean, it's a logic contradiction. But, you know, they'll never acknowledge that. This is what they do every day.
I think your comments are...
This is important.
Isn't that
I love the way he reacts to this. Sam really puts him on the spot. I don't think he expected it. And Patel looks like scared almost.
Correct?
That is true, but you're also... I think your comments are... essentially forgetting to take into account the deeply troubling and horrific history I'm talking about this in the context of the historical context.
My comments are doing what?
I'm not Sam. What I'm saying is that you were taking the president's comments out of context and
how exactly? God, this is pathetic. This is the worst I've ever seen him do. How is that? I mean, this is if you were in a real conversation, okay, how is it out of context? Give me that. But they won't. They'll sidestep and they'll go to somebody else and they'll box you out if they have to. It's explicitly stated. It's exactly what he said. There's no other context to that. Well, what he's doing is trying to walk away from his stumbling into the minefield of pretending Sam Husseini was being irresponsible or insensitive to the plight of the Jews or whatever he was trying to say right there. You know what that translates to? You're an anti-Semite. That's really what that boiled down to. And that's why Sam was immediately like, what are you claiming I'm saying? I'm simply highlighting that what he said is patently false and we can prove it. And even you'll say that if pushed, but you know that anger is the other side of this. So you're trying to walk it down the middle like a coward. That's what he's doing.
My comments are doing what?
I'm not Sam. What I'm saying is that you were taking the president's comments out of context, and when it is clear he is speaking about it in a historical context, given the very horrific and troubling and terrible history that there has been of the Holocaust.
Okay, wait. So So you said the history, and then you referenced one event. I mean, guys. I mean, this was pathetic. He was immediately pulling on the talking points. Holocaust, you don't respect the Jews. Like that's all he did right there. And your statement didn't even make sense. If you're pulling on the historical context of, the point is that's not even the reality. It was obviously citing what Netanyahu just said, not 75 years ago, or whatever we're talking about here, the history from then forward, but the reality that today, which is clearly what they're saying, Biden included, that there's nowhere else safe in the world if Israel doesn't exist. That's the reality.
Said it over and over again.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, God. I guarantee this person absolutely hates this job, especially today. Now, here's a good point to counter that with. Cuts News Network highlights well-known Jewish historian. I think it's Elon Pop, says that he was detained Monday in Gaza, in Israel, in some foreign Jew-hating country, no, in Detroit airport, questioned by federal agents. Why? Because he's an outspoken supporter of Palestine. And he was asked repeatedly, are you a Hamas supporter? Do you regard the Israel actions as genocide? How do you even ask those statements like that's some kind of a legal barrier? The point I'm making here is that they're trying to act like Jews are unsafe anywhere in the world because of the Muslim and Arab and danger that we're trying to fight against. We're talking about American police arresting him for not supporting Israel. I mean, my God, it's the exact opposite of what they're trying to highlight. He says, who are my Arab and Muslim friends in America? How long do I know them? What kind of relationship I've had with them? That's what they're asking him. That is, I mean, it's the Red Scare situation. Or the same thing that's happened 45 times since, where suddenly it's Russia, suddenly it's China. They just use this to dehumanize and scare people. And they use the two-party screamers to make that happen. Now, here's Hananya Naftali, lead propagandist, trying to water that down. Saying, by the way, he's saying Jews are white supremacists, says radicals. And again, I'm sure people are saying that. The argument is Zionists are white supremacists, or rather just racists, right? I mean, and I don't even need to play all of this, just the reality that this is, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, they're all called this an apartheid state. Why? Because you can prove it.
Zionism is racism. Israel cannot be both. Israel is either a racist Jewish state or it's a democratic state for everybody. And that's what...
Ivy Shalom, who goes over the history, the reality of the, I mean, or even just in the particular point he makes is of the nation state law, where they make it clear, Netanyahu says on the record, it's for the state, for the Jews alone. Very clear, right? So the point is that Zionism is an inherently racist concept. Zionism is anti-Semitism, using the Jewish population for its benefits at its expense, just like the American government uses us. My point, though, in this, what we're highlighting, is he's saying that Jews are white supremacists because that's trying to conflate the conversation. Now, I guarantee some people are saying that, but most of what he's highlighting are people saying that Zionism is. And plenty of the ones saying that are also Jews. But here's what he goes. Meanwhile, Ethiopian Jews are proudly serving in the IDF. Here's the worst part about this. I said, well, you might want to ask Ethiopian Jews in Israel what they think, since they seem to disagree. And there is an endless amount of information around this. And I'll show you the ones I linked to right here. This is 2013. Criticism regarding a lack of integration. In Israel, many Ethiopian Jews feel as second-class citizens. They still to this day. Why? What do you think? And guys, this is stated publicly by people in Israel. They are not the same. They are treated as lesser than. And it's sort of the same conversation we talked about in regard to, what was it now? I remember what I talked, there it is. CIA documents that highlight the fact that Zionism, at its creation of Israel, was on the record. This is a CIA document, by the way, which I've grabbed every time, I think, where they were willing to sacrifice the Jews in Arab nations to get what they wanted. That's pretty clear. This is from CIA.gov. Simply saying very clearly, the Jewish agency at the time is apparently willing to sacrifice the Jews residing in Arab countries. Right? So the point, I think, stands for itself. So the point here in regard to Ethiopian Jews is they were used, brought in, sort of like the point we make about Avi Shalom highlighting what Jews went through in Iraq, where they were, again, you can look at some Wikipedia for crying out loud. They were bombed by Mossad to force them into Israel, to make it as simple as possible. Is more to the story. And Ethiopian Jews driven into Israel under the guise of some better life were treated as second-class citizens because they were not white. Here is an article from 2013. Ethiopian women in Israel were given contraceptive without consent. Oh, it almost sounds like eugenics. Here's DW from 2018. Are Ethiopian Jews Israel's second-class citizens? Well, only if you then argue that Palestinians are third, fourth, fifth, whatever way down the line, or non-existent on the scale. But yes, they treat them as lesser than. They'll scream at them on the streets. The settlers will. Here, I know, guys, Abby Martin has done some scathing work on this, showing you the protests they've had about how Ethiopian Jews should be in a certain area. Like, this is open segregation and racism, guys. This is from 2024. For Israel, black Ethiopian Jews are not Jewish enough. Here's Associated Press. It's a different story, but still relevant to what we're talking about. I just talked about the one where a transvert, or is transvert, is that what you call it? Just somebody a convert, excuse me. Transferred and convert got mixed up. A convert to Judaism. It's an Arab man, a Palestinian, who became a Jew by religion, because that's the only thing we're talking about here. Not there is Israelis and there's the real religion of Judaism. The point is he converted to Judaism, not this story, but the other one. And it was pretty well known, in fact, and got shot at a crossing simply because the guy didn't believe him. So what does that show you? First of all, that you get shot because you're not a Jew. On top of that, that it didn't even matter. It's simply because, I think that speaks for itself. Here's a new example. This is from May 16th, 4 days ago. Palestinian converted to Judaism. An Israeli soldier saw him as a threat and opened fire. Now, here we go. There we go. Now, one quick point back to the argument of the responses to the ICC. Here's Rick Scott, Florida senator. He says, while Israel delivers aid, no, that's provably false, in fact. Well, here's the craziest part. The ICC's own investigation said they proved they're delaying it and stopping it, and that's why they're calling them out. And yet Rick Scott's argument is, well, they're delivering aid, protecting civilians, all of which they said they're not doing, by the way. Hamas terrorists take hostages and use children as shields and hospitals as armories. All of which I can prove to you right now Israel's literally doing. And all the things they're saying about them, which wouldn't surprise me, have yet to be proven. But my point is that he starts with saying the things as a contrast that the ICC literally says that they're doing and we all see them doing. Either this person is that shockingly uninformed or he is acting in the interest of a foreign country and against the interest of Americans. The ICC embarrassed itself, he says, with these sham charges against Israel's leadership. Well, here's Zedek saying Watch as an Israeli IDF soldier uses a Palestinian hostage as a human shield. Look at him. He's literally kneeling behind this guy in a blindfold while they're engaging with people shooting on the other side of the street. We already showed you this one. It's an old example. It's from after October 7th, but it's like a month and a half old. Well, here's another one. This is the one we already showed you recently. And Mondoweiss caught up with them and got an entire interview. What it's like to be used as a human shield by the Israeli army. Remember this guy? This was recent. This was like a couple of weeks ago, I think. And they literally had him marching through every area they were going to go into with a blindfold before they went in. And he goes, Israel soldiers rounded up Ahmed Safi and his male family members in Khan Yunis, the safe area, and made them stand atop a sand dune for 12 hours as the soldiers took cover behind them during a firefight with Palestinian resistance fighters. Here's the story. Unreal how clear this is. And all the people screaming you're racist for highlighting this are terrified of both themselves recognizing they've always been wrong and the fact that they're being shown to be what they are. And I'm talking about either Zionists or anybody else who is gaslighting for this, for genocide, for murder, for rape and pillaging. And again, don't forget that a lot of Jewish people are calling that out as well. So have fun pretending that's all about hating those same people. Here's Yunus Tarawi pointing out a lot. And I'm not going to go through this reasonably quick just because this is every damn day. But he goes, exclusive footage reveals the Israeli military, guess what? Just like Scott was ignoring, Rick Scott. Exclusive footage shows them storing weapons and ammunition inside of the Turkish hospital. Surprise, surprise. This happens every time. They're using these as bases, guys. And then they later leave and the hospital can, in some cases, resume work and they come back later. How do you pretend that's not exactly what it looks like? He says, this is another one from May 8th. We've acquired documentation that confirms the Israeli military's use of facilities with the Turkish cancer hospital as a military headquarters. Sniper positions, everything. Here's Ali Abu Nama pointing out every accusation by the Zionist Nazis, and he says that again. My point is, I think it's a clumsy term in most cases because we're not talking about actual Nazis, whether it's capitalized or not. These aren't people part of the Nazi party. In most cases, I can prove to you that people like what's the guy's name now? I'm forgetting the one that Dan Cohen highlighted, the oldest reservist who was literally connected to the Lehigh Party that literally worked alongside the Nazis. You could make that argument. My point is simply to say that if you're going to make the comparison, the Israeli government for the Zionist government is far closer than anything you could label Hamas. And even then knowing that they're the ones that funded them into reality kind of makes it a moot point. In any case, he says that when they act accused, it's a confession. Quote, Israeli troops also appear to be using the Turkish-Palestinian Friendship Hospital, which one specialized in treatment for cancer patients, as a base of operations. They wrote it, and this is the Washington Post. Who cares, though, when they do it? We'll just ignore it. Here is a reporter on the ground, Matsem Al-Dalol, happening right now. Israeli snipers blockade. This keeps happening, by the way. There it goes. Twitter's been really wonky lately, at least for me. I think it's probably just for me and people like us. Blocking Al-Aude Hospital in Jabaliya. So multiple hospitals, surprise, surprise. Shoot at the hospital where there are patients, wounded medical staff, and mothers and newborns from inside the hospital. She adds, for the second day, there's no valid drinking water. This is not weeks ago. This is right now. While, by the way, they're not letting in any aid. Zero. Let's pop this one up. What's the date right now? So this is from 2017. So we're 10 days later. Let's see if that one's up yet. There it is. Let's see what they got. Oh, surprise, surprise. Look at that. Zero. In the entire week from May 10th to May 16th, that is so that's the daily average. The daily total was 5 trucks. That's going down from 500 a day. And they were still in food insecure. Same the next week. Or actually, no, excuse me, that was just the 17th. 5 average. 27 average on the day, 8 to 18th, 19, 0. I mean, guys, this is crazy. This is during a famine, and they've dropped it to be near nothing. While Elon Levy still screams everything's going the way it should because he's a complete liar. Here is Doctors Without Borders. After a strike on the Jabaliya refugee camp on Gaza on the 18th, 34 patients were admitted to a nearby hospital, Alawada, and amid nearby fighting, the hospital has now run out of drinking water. According to our colleagues and other locations in northern Gaza, the hospital is surrounded by tanks. While we were unable to run operations in northern Gaza, some of our staff decided to stay to provide care. This is one of the last functional hospitals in northern Gaza, and some staff and patients are sheltering inside the fight amid the fighting. All warring parties must ensure their protection, and that, the point is keep them safe. They don't care. The Israeli government will probably go to that hospital next. Does anybody, what's the U.S. going to say? Probably Hamas there. What's all the supporters going to say? Human shields. All right, human shields, right? Despite the fact that Israel has been caught repeatedly using human shields during this conversation, and we know that that's a policy they've used many times and continue to use to this very day. 2013, Palestinian children tortured, used as shields by Israel, per the United Nations. Reuters. Israeli soldiers who used Palestinian boy, a 9-year-old, as human shields avoid jail. And that goes on. I've played it many times. I'll open this for you. The entire show here so you can watch it for yourself. The open secret of human shields. It's called the Neighbor Procedure. The UN, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, they've all called it out. It's just crazy. And this is it's the most obvious image in the world. It's a public event that you can look up. It's very, very clear. And that's not supposed to be that because that happened, it should be ignored. I'm not as ridiculous as the Israeli government. If anybody's doing that, they should all be held accountable. My point is that you can prove this explicitly. And yet when they keep yelling about what Hamas is doing, I've yet to see any provable examples of that. Not even to say that I would shock me if I found them or that they showed them to me. My point is you just haven't done that. And that's crazy to me. Here is another post from Rami Abdul from the Euromed Human Rights Group showing you what they're doing to these hospitals. Now watch this, guys. This is pretty wild. Oh, I didn't download that. I want you to hear this, actually. Hold on. This is a real shot from inside the hospital. One hospital full of patients. They keep screaming it's all about human shields, right? Well, here's what it looks like inside one of these hospitals while they bomb them, supposedly going after human shields. And how many times have I said this? Like realistically asking yourself, every single time, what do we see? We see the fallout, right? We see all the children that they claim were human shields, and yet no human. We only see the shields they claim. Every single time we remove all the building rubble and weird, all you find is a bunch of shields, right? I'm not trying to be belittling the people. I'm making a point. Those are dead children, dead families. Where's the human that was supposed to be shielded by that? Are we pretending they got away just in time? Are we trying to pretend? All this is possible. My point is for 7 months, we only ever see the byproduct and not the act because that's not what's happening. Here is what's actually happening. This is what they're doing to hospitals while people are inside them. These are obviously ambulance drivers. But don't forget, ambulance drivers are protected as well. And all they do is just go, they're Hamas, with nothing to back it up. No! ارجع خليك زي ما انت المستشفى يا الله شباب تعالوا بخير انتم سيارة اسعاف يا الله It's so crazy to me because of all the propaganda. Even Christians out there would hear that and act like there's some kind of cry to terrorism or something. He's just saying God. He's saying God. Like this is crazy, just like any other person would. Oh my God, this is crazy. But because of all the extreme propaganda, all the things, the statements that you could scream God and throw a bomb to, that's happened from all his points of history. Whether you're talking about any number of examples from any side of any religion or any race, the point is that people tend to call on their religion. But because of the propaganda, it becomes so, people are just blinded by this stuff. And it's a very clear in this country that people believe. I mean, we went through a period where any Arab after 9/11 was a problem, was dangerous. It's just inherently disgusting. But this is what they're doing to hospitals. Here, Yunus Harawi points out what I was going to show you, or what I said earlier. Here is an Israeli IDF posting their crimes on their own social media accounts. You know what I keep saying about this? How it shows you they have no control over their own army. I mean, either this means that they want this to happen, which shows you how just completely deranged the entire system is, or they actually can't control what they're doing, and they're out there posting their own war crimes on TikTok, which the ICC and ICJ are collecting. And it says, it's a Sergeant Seema Lubling from the 890th Battalion, quote, you have too much China stuff in your kitchen. So it's a kitchen of a Gaza family. He says, I was happy to help you residents of Khan Yunis as much as I had time to. Go sue me at the Hague, you bastards. Here's what he's doing. He's throwing their China and breaking it out in the street. Shows you the kind of the kind of derangement we're talking about. You hate Palestinians, all of them. And as we've heard from plenty of the people speaking off, the whistleblowers, well, there's been 3 or 4 of them now. They want revenge. It's being promoted within the Israeli establishment. They want revenge on all Palestinians. It's not hard to see. And this is an old thread here. There's a bunch of them. January 16th, this guy torches a Palestinian factory, and he writes, add a charge to the indictment in The Hague for contributing to global warming. They're making fun of everybody trying to hold them accountable. You work hard to take over a house, quote, shooting at a home for fun, and the next day he publishes a video showing a D9 destroying everything, he writes. And the next day, the D9 comes and destroys everything. Why do I even bother? They're all admitting what they're doing, just randomly opening fire at people's homes where in some cases there are still people in them. Whole thread. Here's one of those most disgusting examples I've seen, and it's not even gruesome or graphic. These are the toys of children either dead or starving to death or literally struggling from place to place who are desperate, have lost everything they've ever had. And as Saul Rod points out, Israel has killed thousands upon thousands of children in Gaza who will never return home or play with their toys again. This inhumanity is what they call the most moral army in the world. This is what U.S. gives billions of dollars to support. Just sitting there eating their food, sitting in their home, making fun of them. Express News points out, and we've already seen this one actually, this breakdown clip. But oh wait, this was did I grab the? Oh, you know what? I grabbed the wrong one. Son of a gun. This is the Jablia attack. We already showed you this one. This is Suppress News had a different clip. I don't want to go grab it right now. Let me see if I can grab it real quick. Hold on. As I say that. Yeah, I don't want to waste the time. So I'll bring it up in the next show. But he was just reporting on. There's another one I have right here actually. One of these. Anyway, there's the ongoing attacks, put it that way, in all of these areas, by the way. Since I have included, it's in the show notes. This is just the attack they carried out on a refugee camp, killing civilians and journalists. It was all public and nobody seems to care in the international community. Here's Yunus Harawi also pointing out, dear ICJ, I found another instance of incitement to genocide by the IDF. On December 21st, 2023, Israeli Sergeant Devash Shuli wrote, quote, may your village burn while fighting in Gaza in an Instagram post. She took pictures in front of Palestinian homes and structures that she had set on fire. Most moral army in the world. Guys, I mean, it's not as crazy. I mean, it might as well be, but think of them like Guantanamo Bay and the pictures of smiling U.S. military with Arabs in choking, being tortured. It feels that. It feels like that. And don't forget who trained them. Here's Stephen Dozinger saying in another example, saying, does anyone find this as repulsive as I do? The New York Times published a photo of Israeli soldiers taking selfies to celebrate the massive destruction they caused. Destruction that experts believe amounts to genocide. Look at this. These are kids, guys. These are kids that have been brainwashed into thinking they're fighting terrorists. Sort of like the U.S. military. It's disgusting. Here's an example of an individual. This is a real story. Palestinian elderly man, just like the one we talked about a second ago. His name is Bilal al-Jamala. He was released by the Israeli occupation from a military checkpoint, handcuffed with zip ties, severely tortured. And then as he was walking away, they shot him in the back. I just don't know how you make sense. That is hatred. That is pure evil. And now I guess he's fighting to survive. Look, they're even taking, look, they're taking off the wrist. Look how tight they are in his hand, guys. My God. So all that shows you in the worst, I mean, aside from the worst of it, which is just being devious, torturous, is that they released him. So that's essentially going, look, he's not Hamas, but we're going to shoot him in the back anyway because we're evil. Here's a censored man, which interestingly highlights back to this, or wait, this one, about May Your Village Burn. Here's a bunch of children, a bunch of kids in an Israeli school dancing and chanting. You know what they're saying? May your village burn down. You know what they're aiming at? A Palestinian teacher who had attended the Nakba Day march. And apparently that teacher is being threatened with dismissal for her job for, caring about Palestinian death. And the children say Palestinian children are raised to hate. That's what we get told, right? Which in some cases you probably are right. My point is that this is exactly what we're trying to highlight. This is a culture that has convinced these people that it's okay to hurt and kill innocent people because you don't like who they are. Now, it's not just in Gaza. Here's the West Bank. Israeli settlers attack the town of Yatma south of Nablus, setting fire to Palestinian properties. Guys, this happens constantly. Nobody, I mean, literally, I don't even think Israel pretends this is okay. They just don't care. But even the U.S., everybody says this is wrong. But guess what? Nobody tries to stop it. Israeli settler militias. This is an important part of the story. So this has to do with aid, but also just the settlers doing whatever they want with zero accountability. In the West Bank, Israeli settlers attack aid trucks destined for Gaza. The U.S., the U.S. too, but the Israeli military, in fact, usually guard them while they do this. This is a coordinated institutional event. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Yanis Tarawi points out that he's receiving reports from Nablus, from West Bank. We see the Israeli settlers attacking these aid trucks everywhere. Here's an example where they attacked somebody who was not driving aid. I mean, still nobody will care unless the host country decides to actually do what's right. Israeli settlers attack Palestinian trucks near Nablus, punch up the tires of the truck. The driver's shirtless, probably got lynched, he writes. We have a follow-up to this. Israeli settlers block the road for these trucks. So here's my point. So this guy is driving a truck, gets pulled out of the truck, gets beat up. Here's what happened. This is BM highlighting, they thought it was aid to Gaza, he says. Even though I told them the goods were for my work, they took me off the truck and started beating me brutally in all parts of my body. According to him, more than 100 settlers were there. They only did it because I am Arab, he said, cursed at me and to continue to attack me until they inflicted severe injuries on me. He was taken to the hospital in moderate condition. Don't you think the world should care about something like that? Doesn't that sound like a hate crime? Don't you think that's what the United States government pretends they care about? The point is that this wasn't even aid, and it doesn't even matter because there's so little accountability right now. It is rampant. This is just a small example of how wrong this is right now in every possible way, and that they are leaning into it. You've got U.S. politicians that are saying you're racist for not supporting this. Here's Yanis Tarawi highlighting another clip posted on social media. Israeli soldier from the 55th Paratroopers Brigade literally showing the flattening to the ground of the safe zone known as Khan Yunis. Look at this. That's multiple city blocks. And tractors and blowing things. I mean, this is about completely flattening the area. And they keep telling you that. They're having conferences about it. And yet we get lied to by Biden and the rest of the meek followers that they pretend are our government. And there's a whole thread of the same damn stuff. Scenes from Israeli soldiers showing from the 626th, so actually 6 261st Battalion of the 261st Brigade systematically blowing up civilian homes in eastern parts of Khan Yunis. Over and over, randomly shooting at the mosque in the city and laughing about it. More blowing up of homes. Here's examples of Ukrainian fighters. Look at it. We keep showing you this, guys. You know why that's relevant? Because the Ukrainians are actually openly neo-Nazi, and they're happily working alongside the Zionist group. Make sense of it. You can if you really want to. I'm going to include that for a show coming up just because it's important. I forgot about that. There's plenty more in there. Now, Elijah Monnier points this out. The destruction of Gaza, and this is actually not familiar with the platform, but he said it looks like a French platform. Oh, I'm sorry, I take it back. I forgot where we were on this. This is a report that I broke down for you right here. We'll show you next. He says the destruction of Gaza on the Madrid map and this is what's really important. It's exactly what we already know, but it's being confirmed a third and fourth time. Between 40 and 50% of all munitions launched on Gaza since October 7th have been unguided. Unguided. Which means there's just no way you could pretend that they're pinpoint targeting Hamas, like the liar Alan Dershowitz says, or as Netanyahu claims. The point is you're getting this stuff. Where was it? You're getting that stuff. Complete destruction of entire areas, many of which have people in them. Unguided demolition. And then we're not even talking about demolition. We're talking about targeted bombing using the 2,000-pound dumb bombs. Which, by the way, as we've shown you many times, the New York Times and Haaretz broke this down, that they have proven Israel's using the most destructive bombs in the sea areas. And those are the dumb bombs without guidance. Here's the report. I'll just break down what it's. You change the title for you here. From Arganzula to Tatuan, the destruction of Gaza on the map of Madrid. It says the use of dumb bombs or imprecise bombs that have provoked the condemnation of organizations like Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch amid accusations of war crimes and genocide, and a transfer of weapons from the U.S., the main supplier to Israel, which continues to be produced beyond Joe Biden's specific decision to freeze shipment 2 weeks ago. My point exactly. They never stopped it. So as Brian Mast acts like he's doing legislation to force them to do the thing they all know they're still doing, it's an illusion. It's a show. Between 40 and 50% of all munitions launched in Gaza have been unguided. And these are much less precise than smart bombs and guided bombs. It says, so far, the Americans have sent the Israelis 15,000 to 25,000 bombs and about 60,000 artillery shells. But the Israelis have used, according to Israeli military officials, 3 times more than they expected in Gaza. That is why they have used the unguided bombs. MK82, for example, which we talked about all the way back in Yemen, which killed a school bus full of children. So nothing new for the U.S. government. So when they used unguided bombs, it means that they cause serious damage and they may not reach the desired target. That's a quote. But they swear up and down that they're only targeting civilians, right? Because they know. Well, here's a great thread by Ahmad, Israeli crimes in Western eyes. In this thread, he says he posts some of Israel's crimes across the decades with media sources, shedding light on the period of 1940 to 2022. Get ready to witness what's hidden. Now, we're not going to go through this today. We've talked about. I probably will go through this more in depth in a future show. My point is that this is the reality that goes back long before October 7th. So we just talked about what's happened since today. But if you really break this stuff down, he starts with the Balfour Declaration and the ongoing Nakbas after that to this very day. But this is not a new reality. And in fact, if you really look at what happened during the Nakba and the second Nakba, it's shockingly similar to what we're seeing right now because it's the same damn thing. And here's what Netanyahu said. I believe this was 20-something years ago. And he was younger. You'll want to hear this, especially after what we just showed you.
But it is not terrorism, because what terrorists do is target the innocent deliberately. And therefore, my definition of terrorism is the systematic and deliberate attack, the murder, maiming, and menacing of innocents, of civilians, for political goals.
Cradle always doing good work. Is that not what they're doing? Right. I mean, in fact, that's the real definition of terrorism until the U.S. kind of contorted into being the people they point to, right? Which is using violence to achieve political ends. That's the real definition. You know why they changed that? Because it's easy to lay that lens over everything that's being done today. The U.S. government is constantly using violence to achieve its political ends. So they have to change it, like they changed the definition of gain of function and whatever else. The point is that what he just highlighted is aiming at civilians intentionally. Guys, there is more evidence to that than literally anything on the table. Let's not forget what the IDF whistleblower said. I played it in the beginning, but this is only one of many.
Do you think that you witnessed war crimes taking place?
Probably. The ground assumption is that they are Hamas. And then if you go this way, you're bound to kill people that are not.
Now, in a rare interview, one soldier tells us about the reality he says he witnessed. What kind of stuff would they say?
There are no uninvolved, only unarmed. This is something that I'm going to carry for the rest of my life.
Easy. It's not hard to miss that. Right? So what he's highlighting right there is exactly, let's see if I can pull this up. Yep, there we go. Here's the show in case you want to watch it. It's actually really powerful. I have about a 6-minute clip that I break down from the entire interview that has a lot of information in it, which you can watch in here. IDF whistleblower admits institutional war crimes are openly being committed in Gaza. What you heard in that little clip is it's not even remotely the most damning parts, but it's very clear, right? That yes, the main point that everybody there is, it's either armed or not. The point is they're all guilty and they're killing innocent people on the record all the time. So doesn't that make what he says here more relevant? Deliberately targeting civilians for political goals? Yes. And by the way, that also includes your own people. A la the Hannibal Directive, which is provably, in my opinion, that's one of the most provable aspects of all of this. Because the colonel has admitted it, helicopter pilots have admitted it, tank drivers have admitted it, the head security of the kibbutz area has openly admitted it, Israeli hostages, and I've never seen something better sourced in my life. And yet we still debate it? It's shocking how clearly they have control over this conversation. But they have lost, most of it over the last 7 months of self-defense? Well, on top of all of that, this just drives me crazy. Now, look, I'll just read what I said because I include it. RFK Jr. on Russell Brand's podcast with shockingly little pushback says, I don't think Israel's intention is genocide, which I don't know why we would ever speak about intent. How the hell you think you know what they all collectively think when we're talking about the actions of the government, and even then what Netanyahu thinks, for example. But whatever. It says, I don't believe there's any evidence of genocide. Let that sink in. No evidence of genocide. Despite the world court saying there's evidence for genocide. The IDF has protected civilians better than any army in history, he said. I said, RFK just said the IDF has protected civilians better than any army in history. This man, despite, and I mean this, being better in most ways than the other presidential candidates, is either compromised in some way or willfully dishonest when it comes to Israel and Zionism. I just don't know how else you read that. And look, if I, gun to my head, if I had to pick one of the fake candidates put in front of us, it'd probably be him. But it's incredible to think that, as I've said, and I stand by this from the moment he opened his mouth about this, next to that maniac Rabbi Shmuley. His stance on Israel is morally indefensible. But so is Biden's, so is Trump's. It's no different. So my point is that this isn't about just trying to go after the one that seemed like that's how that will get framed by some. But it's clear. In almost every other way, he's at least better than the rest of them, in my opinion. But my God, I don't know how you can take the rest of it at face value. How can you be anti-war? How can you be anything you claim to be if this is how you frame the most obvious thing going on in the world right now? Now, look, the thing I've said before, and some people even say this in the chat, they want to believe that he's doing this just to get elected. He's going to change everything, and it's all a ploy. I hope so. It would be a pretty brazen move, but if he did, I would go, that's great. I just don't think that's what's happening. I hope you are right. Any honest person should hope. We'll wait and see. Here's what Biden said. Now, this is one of the worst parts of this. This came out, I think this was on the 19th, actually, just recently, and made this statement about something that we can prove is not true. And I can almost guarantee you this was given to him by somebody within the Zionist circles in order to downplay or hype up again some kind of atrocity propaganda circle of news to stop the focus on everything we're talking about. Whether it is the fact that they just killed an international UN member that got buried under the claims of Hamas policemen that were just actually policemen, or the idea of taking down an Iranian helicopter, or the idea of committing coups in Congo. I mean, any number of things, or just the obvious genocide that they're committing. This is what he had to say. And by the way, it's the same place he was floating the Congolese flag behind the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is disgusting based on what they're doing. But here's what he said.
What's happening in Gaza and Israel is heartbreaking. Hamas's vicious attack on Israel, killing innocent lives and holding people hostage.
That's first of all where you go with that. It's heartbreaking what's happening in Gaza. Look at what they did on the 7th. They'd at least be a little, I mean, somebody could write that a little better.
I was there 9 days after. Sent pictures of tying a mother and a daughter in a rope, pouring kerosene on them, burning them, and watching as they died.
100% false. I mean, think about this, guys. First of all, evident. I mean, international, but independent bodies, at least within the Israeli investigation, have spoken about the reality that there is nothing they've seen. And I'm talking about people that have been allowed to be special screenings, like, for instance, Owen Jones from The Guardian, right? Saying that doesn't, what you said is in here is not in here. I've watched it, and so too of the others, and they agree. We didn't see what you claim was there. So some of them are lying, clearly. The point is that the evidence that has been presented, which has not changed, has been seen by some people who have acknowledged that there are no beheaded babies. There's no evidence of 90% of what they said happened. There's no babies in an oven. There's no babies cut out of a woman's stomach. There's not babies on a clothesline. They lied about all of it. So my point is that didn't happen based on everything we've been presented with as the full body of the evidence. But on top of that, do we believe that if Israel had this tucked away, they wouldn't have shown this by now? And on top of that, he's talking about a picture that was shown to him 9 days afterward. There's nothing about this real. Biden is a tool. And frankly, I don't even think he knows it. I think he's so senile and lost at this point, it doesn't even matter. But it matters to the people that you're gaslighting. It matters to the genocide that you're hiding. As Max says, yet another sickening lie to justify Israel's genocide. And the squirrel just adds to this saying, well, in fact, I think he actually put it out there first. It was May 19th. I think this one came out on the 20th. The point is that the squirrel highlighted this, saying, and this was on the 19th, saying in his commencement speech, this is what he said, what we just played for you. And then, as always, he has a great thread breaking down some tangential information about the New York Times and Washington Post, scam reports. They've already been retracted, by the way, yet the lingering elements around it have yet to be retracted, which is what we always show you and how this works. Right? Where they put out the fake story and then other outlets report about what they said. And then other reports point back to that one and say, here's another second source, when all they're doing is pointing to each other. So the point is that even though the New York Times breaking news about rape story has been retracted, the other ones that point to that are still going around and act like we can prove it. So the point is he breaks down all this good information about the lie that has been circulating. Oh, look at that. Where was it? Oh, no, it's the wrong one. But anyway, here's what he said about this. He said, this is such an insane lie on so many levels. What does it even mean that you saw photos of them tying a mother and daughter together and pouring kerosene on them, burning them, and watching as they die? Like, think about how that even makes sense. Who was taking these photos in perfect sequence so you could see all that happening? Like, you realize one photo would not encapsulate what he just said there. But again, that's usually Biden's senility and not even realizing what he's saying. But he says, what the F are you talking about? Well, he just calls him out. And he says, everyone in the prestige liberal media class is thinking this is normal. They all repost his speech. New York Times, even showing you the ones that are pretending to be in line with the campus protests are in fact just going along to get along. They're all part of the problem. Here's a good video. We're going to end with a point about the pier. Here's a good video, which I played before. It just needs to be seen again and again. It's a leaked video from 2001. Khaleesi point this out. Listen to Netanyahu say that Israel intentionally strikes Palestinians painfully. He brags about deceiving the U.S. to break the Oslo Accords and confirms Americans will always support Israel. Now think about that when you get your politicians and your two-party screamers acting like you're un-American if you don't support Israel. Ask yourself what that's coming from. Says the main thing is first to strike them. The main thing is first of all to strike them. Not once, but several times, so painfully that the price they pay is unbearable. Now, this is about the idea of carpet bombing Gaza because of a rocket hit a field. And in many cases where the rocket wasn't even fired from Gaza. And I've talked about this. It's just about setting a tone or trying to create a political benefit for himself. Usually because he's about to go to jail or being accused of something. That's been written about by Israeli media many times. He says, so far, the price tag is not unbearable, meaning they haven't hurt them enough. He goes, I mean, a large-scale attack on the Palestinian Authority, causing them to fear that everything is about to collapse. Fear is what brings them to. Hold on, he goes, but then again, the world will say that we're the aggressors, right? Because they are. So they can say whatever they want. Aren't you afraid of what they'll say, Bibi? Which is his nickname. Especially today with the U.S. I know how they are. America is something that you can easily maneuver. Listen up, Republicans, and move in the right direction. And even if they say something, so then they say something, so what? Yeah, he's learning that's different today, isn't he? 80% of America supports us, he says. It's absurd, he said. He doesn't think highly of you. He says, look, I wasn't afraid to maneuver the Clinton administration. I wasn't afraid to confront Clinton. I wasn't afraid to go against the UN. What happened to the Oslo Accords? The Accords which were ratified by Parliament. I was asked before the 1996 elections, will you fulfill them? I said yes, subject to reciprocity and minimizing pullouts. I gave my own interpretation to the agreements in such a way that will allow me to stop the race back towards the 1967 borders. There's no way to misunderstand that. It's a lie. He's using you, political American government. I mean, most of them know that, don't care. They're doing this against your interests. America needs to listen to this. And saying that he put forward his so-called agreement in such a way that he knew he'd be able to stop it from happening. That's not honest. This is how did we manage to do this? Nobody defined what military facilities are. So he lied. It's the same thing the U.S. government does with the way they frame their legislation. They leave it open to interpretation so they can manipulate it however they want at your expense. He says, so I define them as being security zones. The entire Jordan Valley for me is a military facility. Nobody has. Yes, like the Het Schween Valley. She responded. He says, you see, go figure. But then there was the question of who will define these military facilities. I received a letter from Secretary of State Warren to me and Arafat at the same time, saying that Israel and Israel alone will define the military facilities, their locations and size. Now they don't want to give me this letter. So I refused to ratify the Hebron Accords of 1997. I stopped the government meeting and I said I won't sign. And only when the letter has arrived during that meeting, to me and to Arafat, I signed the Hebron Accords. It's better to give 2% than 100%. And this is the choice we face. The point he's making is that we have an out. We'll sign it as long as you give us this letter, which suggests that I get to dictate the terms, which means I can create the dynamic, which makes it look like they are the ones breaking the rules or whatever it is. It's exactly what we're dealing with today. It's the same person, same group, same conversation. And on top of that, we'll get to the pier next to end. It's what they're doing there. Acting like we're doing this for them when all you're doing is cementing in something you're going to use to hurt them again. He says you gave 2%, but you stopped the withdrawal rather than 100%. That's the reality. And yet all these people in the two-party illusion will act like you're wrong for not supporting that, even though they've seen that. They just don't care. Now, here's the last part. NY Plaid points this out. Note the humanitarian port, lying terrorist dogs, he says. The U.S. Army installs the USC Ram air defense system to protect the floating dock in Gaza. Because that makes sense, right? In addition to the American MLIDS, the system dedicated to combating marches, he says, why are all these systems put in place as long as a dock is humanitarian and its goal is to deliver aid to the people of Gaza? The point on top of that being that Israel is in control of the area. So are you pretending that you're not secure in and of yourself in regard to the areas? I mean, you got Israeli military, Navy, because this is not about humanitarian aid. He says, we repeat and repeat the human facade, but what was hidden was greater. Now here, you can see people have taken images, but they're already installing their military defense systems. And the Post simply says, the U.S. Army installs the USC Ram air defense system to protect the floating dock. Oh, they just broke it down, the same thing. In addition to the American MLIDs. So what they're doing is making another military base. Both a sort of a joint U.S.-Israeli base, because it was really Netanyahu's plan. Long before this ever happened, for the pier, which they earlier floated as some kind of area to store all the Gazan people, then they pushed it for a pier for humanitarian aid. So the point is, even one conversation, they shifted why they would use this, and we just let it go. Or rather, American politicians let it go. So at the end of the day, it's not what it seems. And I said, only a complete fool or willfully or the willfully ignorant did not see this coming. This was never about humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, Gaza famine. All right, so this was supposed to fix the problem. So we're going to put in all the military installations first and bring all of our people. We're going to bring over ships and ships of equipment and everything, instead of not a drop of food or water. Then we're going to bring in all the military equipment and not a drop of food or water. Meanwhile, by the time we maybe pretend to bring in food, it's going to be 2 months later and they're all going to be dead. But, oops, we tried, right? It's just so self-evident, everything about this is. I know you guys see it. I know the world sees it. Yet it still continues to goose march forward. Goose step forward. That's what's happening. We're watching it. The question is, are we going to do something about it? And I never mean violence, but I do believe that there are ways with this much momentum to truly stop them in their tracks. I just hope we have the courage to continue to do so, to stay the course and fight for the people that truly deserve to be fought for. Whether you're Israeli or American or Palestinian or Jewish or Muslim or Christian, the people who are being lied about, who are being oppressed, who are living with a boot on their neck. And all of them are in that category in some way or another in the world. Those are the people we should fight for. Ask the Ethiopian Jews, right? Ask the Torah Judaism group that gets beat up in Israel all the time for talking about Zionism. Ask the Muslims all around the world in these countries that are attacked by the United States. Ask any number of Christians in the world how they're being treated in places where Israel bombs them, like in Syria. Ask any number of these groups anywhere in the world, and you will find oppressed people who are being gaslit and lied about and stepped on. And the best they can do is say you only hate Jews because you dare to fight for any of them. It's time to stand up. Never has there been a more important time to stand up and fight. And I, again, don't mean violence, but I mean fight. So thank you for tuning in today, guys. I really, really hope that we can get something like, as I said many times, this is the day in, day out watching of this tragedy is just heartbreaking. And I believe we're making a difference. I know that we are, but I feel like we're at a point where there's no way, what can we do? Let me know. Reach out. Let's talk about this. What else can we do to mobilize this to stop in real time what they're doing? All the tools are in place. I just don't, I know what it is. It's the top of the level people at the two-party illusion that are pointing at everything else like the scarecrow, and we're letting this continue as we're pointing at other issues and other topics. Other things are obviously going on in the world, but it should matter to us that everything our tax dollars and our weaponry, it's all going to kill innocent people. While I'm saying this, children are being killed. As I'm saying this, children are starving to death right now. I don't know how that doesn't matter to the world's professed rules-based international order or leader of the free world or any of the nonsense that we push out about our government. We can do that as the people of this country. The government has shown itself to not be fighting for your interests. Now, it's statements like that are going to get people, that are going to get me in trouble, which if I cared about getting in trouble, I wouldn't be doing this. But I know that's where this is going. Now, if we can truly mobilize an effort, maybe not. Maybe these people are on the knife's edge right now. They're on a precipice. They're about to fail or cement this forever. And the point is that right now, being the one calling them out as potentially treasonous, well, yeah, that might not work out well for me or anybody honest about this conversation. But if we don't, well, it guarantees that it's going to continue. And I'm not okay with that. So like all of us, I believe we should be willing to risk everything to fight for what matters. So thank you for tuning in. Continue to support this platform and anybody else who deserves to be fought for. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
This is the Defense Minister, Moshe Yaalon, talking just a couple of weeks ago. Israel is going to hurt Lebanese civilians, to include kids of the family. We went through a very long discussion. We did it then. We did it in the Gaza Strip. We are going to do it in any round of hostilities in the future. That's the defense minister. This is the military chief of staff, Benny Gantz. The next round of violence will be worse and see this suffering increase. He headed up the military assaults on Gaza, the last two. This is the Minister for Education in the Netanyahu government. There will never be a peace plan with the Palestinians. I will do everything in my power to make sure they never get a state. He also said, if you catch terrorists, you simply have to kill them. I've killed a lot of Arabs in my life, and there's no problem with that. This is the Minister for Justice. Palestinians are all enemy combatants. This also includes the mothers of the martyrs. They should follow their sons. Nothing would be more just. They should go, as should the physical homes in which they raised the snakes. Otherwise, more little snakes will be raised there. That's the Israeli Minister for Justice in the last few months. The Israeli Deputy Minister for Defense. Palestinians are beasts. They are not human. The Minister for Foreign Affairs, C.P. Hockley, this is the last one. My position is that between the sea and the Jordan River, there needs to be one state only, the State of Israel. There is no place for any agreement of any kind that discusses the concession of Israeli sovereignty over lands conquered in 1967. Now, these are the official statements of several ministers of the current government of Israel. In one case, actually advocating genocide of all Palestinians, including children, and calling them snakes. Now, can I ask you, Taoiseach, do you not think that if we're defining terrorism, that is the language and thinking of terrorists, that it is absolutely unacceptable in civilized politics, in civilized international relations, for the heads of government of a state that we carry on normal relations with and who you met in Paris to advocate those sort of views when we know they have also led on to the deaths of thousands of Palestinians, innocent men, women and children? What have you to say, Taoiseach, about those sort of views being expressed by the Israeli government?